Welcome everybody to our 26th annual general meeting and conference. This year's theme is Nature to the Rescue. It has been an unprecedented year fraught with so many changes and uncertainty. However, nature has persisted and provided us an outlet to explore and learn new things. One silver lining of the pandemic is that it forced us all to slow down and look for local opportunities, and many came away with better appreciation of just how much we have all around us. Our virtual event highlights many topics that can be easily pursued in your own backyard, from local foraging and ethnobotany to gardening with native plants. I'm hosting this online event from Saskatchewan, which lies in Treaty 6 territory. Treaty 6 encompasses the traditional territories of numerous First Nations, including Cree, Dene, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Ojibwe, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are dedicated to ensuring that the spirit of reconciliation and Treaty 6 is honored and respected. Our first speaker of the day is Jacey Bell. Jacey is an outdoor enthusiast who is currently working as a laboratory instructor in the University of Saskatchewan's biology department. She volunteers as treasurer of the NPSS and is one of the organizers of the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group.
Okay, I think my screen is shared now.
Yep.
It's good? Okay. So I'm here today to talk about making connections. Now more than ever, especially teaching online, I've noticed that it's really beneficial to be able to make connections with the people you're talking to, especially my students when they're learning remotely. So I thought that would tie in nicely to the beautiful relationship between fungi and plants. So a relationship between two different kingdoms of organisms. So we're going to start with some basics of fungal biology and ecology, and then we'll talk about how the fungi and plants have worked together for a very long time. There we go. So just to start with, who am I? Chet gave you a little rundown. I am a laboratory instructor at the University of Saskatchewan, and I love all things to do with plants, mushrooms, any kind of fungus really, and animals. And more importantly, what is the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group? So we're a group of people who are interested in fungi and documenting all the different species of fungus you can find in the province. So to start with, what do you picture when you think of fungi? Probably mushrooms, right? You've got the little bracket fungi that grow on trees, your mushrooms that grow up out of the ground, and if you're getting really kind of creative, you might be thinking of some of these coral fungi or the bird's nest fungi, which are really cool. However, these are just a teeny tiny part of the fungus itself. These are just the fruiting bodies that are used for reproduction. So they produce the spores, but there's a whole lot more going on underground. So here's a photograph from the lab. My students and I were playing around with isolating some species from herbivore manure. And here we've got some Coprinopsis mushrooms growing on paper towel. And as you can see, there's a tiny little fruiting body, a mushroom in here. But over the course of a day or two, that disappears as the spores are released and it kind of autolyzes itself. But if you look below, you can see this huge network of hyphae. So hyphae are like little tiny strands, and they're the actively growing part of the mushroom that's persistent underground. A whole bunch of hyphae together are known as a mycelium. So on the right here, you can see I've got a jar of sterilized grain, and it's been inoculated with just a little bit of oyster mushroom hyphae. And fungi are heterotrophs like us. They can't photosynthesize, so they need to get their energy from somewhere else. but they also don't have mouths or legs to run around on, which presents a bit of a challenge. So they've adapted by growing through their substrate and exuding these enzymes to break down the things that they're growing on. Then they're able to uptake the nutrients directly into their cells. You can see here a full mycelium has grown. And there's no mushrooms present, but this is still our oyster mushroom living, I guess, in its substrate. Oh, here's a close-up look at hyphae. So as you can see, they're super, super small. They're just tiny little threads, but that gives them a really, really big surface area to volume ratio, which is going to become important later on when we talk about them extending the root networks of trees. So you can see them here running through some agar, and here's another type of hyphae at 1,000 times magnification. So again, really tiny, and they've got these cell walls on them. So how do they form these relationships with plants? It turns out this has been happening for a lot longer than we originally thought. There is evidence in fossils of plants of fungal structures from over 400 million years ago. So if you take a look at this image here on the right, especially down here on the bottom right, this is zoomed in a single plant cell, and you can see tiny little hyphae penetrating that cell. So this is known to have been occurring since the Devonian now. So it's thought that there's been a coevolution of plant roots and fungi to work together from the very beginning since they started colonizing land. And the combination of the plant roots and the mycorrhiza that grow, the plant roots and the fungal hyphae that grow together is called a mycorrhiza. So if you break that down, it's just fungus plus root. The term has first been used since 1885, so we have known about this for quite a while. According to Bryce Kendrick, all mycorrhizal associations include 4 things. So you have your fungal mycelium, which is really useful for exploring bigger areas of soil than the plant could do on its own, and also retrieving nutrients from that soil. You have a fungus-plant interface, so that is where those fungal hyphae actually meet up with the plant cell, and they're able to exchange photosynthates from the plant and nutrients and water from the fungus. So there's a couple different kinds where they might, the cells might just be touching one another, or the fungal cells can also penetrate the plant cell. You need plant tissues that can produce carbohydrates. So you've got a tree that's photosynthesizing, producing sugars, and it's able to pass that on to the fungus. And then you need reproductive structures. And the really cool thing is that the plants and the fungi, they reproduce separately from one another. So oftentimes when you see mushrooms growing under a tree, that's the fruiting body of these mycorrhizal fungi. And they'll produce their own spores that will germinate in the soil, and the trees, of course, or the plants, will produce their own seeds. And then it's kind of a race to find one another once the germination of both happens. So why would these plants and fungi co-evolve in the first place? So plants, which we call phytobionts, are one half of this important relationship, and fungi, we call them mycobionts. They're the other half. So there's a benefit to both parties. The plants are producing large amounts of sugar through photosynthesis, and it's thought that when fungus started growing on land rather than in water, it might have had a harder time obtaining enough energy to grow as rapidly as it does, because those hyphae are constantly growing and reaching out for new substrate to explore. So they were able to tap into plants and get a really high energy food source. And then the fungi have that massive surface area to absorb a lot of water. Though early plants are known to not have very extensive root systems, but they could compensate for this by forming partnerships with the fungus, which could absorb a lot more water for them and nutrients as well, especially phosphorus. And you can see here in the picture, this is a close-up of some spruce roots. It looks like it's been grown in a pot, but it's formed these mycorrhizal associations. So all the white fuzzy stuff is the fungus, and the red roots here are from the tree. And they grow in really close proximity to each other, and they're actually exchanging things on a cellular level. So today, over 90% of plant species, closer to almost all plant species, I believe, form mycorrhizal associations. There's actually a lot of research going into coming up with inoculants of the right type of fungus for things like reforestation or even agricultural crops to reduce fertilizer needs. So only about 130 fungal species are known to be endomycorrhizal partners. And this is the one we looked at before in the fossilized material. So this is where the fungus actually can grow into the plant cells and forms tiny little arbuscules. They look like little trees. They give the fungus a large surface area to interface with the plant. So only 130 fungal species that we know of, but over 300,000 plant species use this sort of an interface. The interesting thing about these type of fungi is they're completely reliant on having a plant partner. Most of them can't survive without it. They also don't produce any reproductive structure. Well, I shouldn't say that. They don't produce any sexual reproductive structures. So they're mainly just cloning themselves through haploid spores. So you don't see mushrooms from these guys, really. So I'm not going to talk too much about them. More commonly seen from the fungal side of things is these ectomycorrhizal associations. These are fascinating because most forest trees need these associations to really thrive, especially pine and spruce. So these are the species of fungus that produce many familiar mushrooms. That's why when you're picking mushrooms, you should always note what sort of tree you find your mushroom growing next to. It can help with identification because some fungal species will only grow in association with certain types of trees. It might be only growing in association with hardwoods, or it might be highly specific and grow only with pine or something like that. So you'll notice only about 2,000 species of plants have this kind of association, but more than 5,000 fungal partners do. And trees may be able to have multiple different fungal partners at once, and during their different growth stages may switch to have a different mycorrhizal association. But if we look up close, we call this the mantle. This is like a mycelium that essentially forms around the root tip and covers it there. And then if you look inside the plant cells, you'll see that the cells are not penetrated by any hyphae, but they're growing all in between. And this is in the cortex of the root. So it's it's interfacing with all of those storage cells in the roots that hold the carbohydrates that the fungus wants access to. It won't go into the vascular tissue, but the plant is able to uptake things into these cortical cells and transport it to the vascular tissue when it needs it. It's phosphorus and other minerals, and it's water. So this is called the heartache net. When you have it in section, this is a very tiny image. You'll see the dark spots are where plant cells would be, and the net is all of these little hyphae woven around each cell. So it's actually a really, really cool structure, at least if you're a biology nerd like me. I've just got a picture here. There's a whole bunch of mushrooms we're really familiar with, and what we don't see is below ground. These are the ones that are forming associations with those trees and with those plants. So there's some you might be familiar with. We've got chanterelles, russulas, some of the boletes, some of the milk caps, and morels. And I do believe our next presenter, Donovan, will be talking about at least one or two of these. So these, again, are just the reproductive structure that will release the spores to allow more of these mycorrhizal associations to occur. If I have enough time here, I'm just going to talk about two really cool specialized mycorrhizas that I'm particularly interested in, and I thought you guys might be too if you like some of the weirder plants in Saskatchewan. We've got several species of orchid, and a really neat thing about them is that they have tiny, tiny little seeds. They don't have very many reserves in that seed for the embryo to grow when the seed germinates. So they're actually almost entirely reliant on a fungal partner in order to establish themselves. This orchid mycorrhiza works almost in reverse to the other ones we've been looking at, where the fungal partner will grow into the seed, and as that little plant embryo is developing, the seeds will be penetrated by small coils of hyphae, which are then absorbed by the plant. So the plant is stealing carbon from the fungus in order to cause itself to grow bigger. So it's really neat because it's kind of that reverse relationship. It's been proposed that this relationship is still evolving as it's relatively unstable. There's three main outcomes. The first one is the one we're all hoping for, where the orchid digests some of that fungus, is able to grow, and then maintains a nice mycorrhizal relationship afterwards, where it may channel some photosynthetes back into that fungus after it's been helped to germinate. The other two things that could happen, though, in some cases are the fungal infection in the cells is too strong and overwhelms the plant, and then they both die, or the fungal infection is not successful and the plant isn't able to germinate. So it could be why I know some people have said you have relatively low success rate in orchid germination, and that could be because that relationship is still sort of in a trial and error phase. I don't know how many millions of years it takes for these things to evolve, but maybe someday orchids will grow everywhere all the time. I don't know. And this one here is my personal favorite type of mycorrhiza. So these are called the monotropoid mycorrhizas, and it was long thought that these plants here, ghost pipe you can see, were saprotrophic, which means they just eat decaying organic matter. However, that's actually not the case. They form a special association with these fungi, usually in the genus bolete, actually, or boletus. So I've got a little bolete mushroom down here, where the hyphae of the bolete grow inside the cells of the our ghost pipe and kind of feed it carbon. So it's been questioned if it might be that these plants are actually parasitic on the fungus. However, that's only one half of the relationship. On the other end, there's an endomycorrhizal association with pine trees. So this fungus almost forms a bridge between the pine and the monotropa and shuttles carbon from one to the other. And it's been proposed that the pine might not even know that it's supporting the ghost pipe. It just knows that it's giving carbon to its fungal partner. So it's just a really nifty sort of thing going on. I don't know. I always teach it to my students as fungal bridges so they remember. And then on the right here, I've just got another example of a plant that uses the same mechanism. And this is from the Cypress Hills when I was there years ago with the Entomological Society. It was the first time I'd ever seen pine drops, and I just thought it was beautiful. It's in the same family as blueberry, actually. And I believe Monotropa may have been moved into that family as well. I don't know, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, they use this really wonderful sort of connection. So kind of in conclusion, making connections is really beneficial to both parties, both the plants and the fungi, in most cases, not necessarily with the orchids, I suppose. So plants actually experience increased stress tolerance, whether it's drought, salinity, toxic environments, that sort of thing. It's been shown that they're more able to grow when they have the support from their mycobiont partner. And the fungi basically just experience a really reliable source of high energy food, which is really, really important when you grow such a massive surface area of mycelium. And just to tie this back into our Nature to the Rescue presentation, I've been teaching online for the past year now, and I know how important it is to make connections, like with your students, with your friends, with your family, and I just thought it went really well with this theme of having our very first Zoom presentation. We can't actually be in the same room together, but we can still make that connection. So I'm really happy I was able to come talk to you today. So if you want to know any more about any of these things, I've got my email here, the iNaturalist project for the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group, our Instagram handle, the email for the Sask Mycology group, and our Facebook page, which is where we're most active. You're welcome to post your photos there. You just have to answer a couple of questions to be accepted into the group so that we know you're not a robot. Yeah, with that, do you guys have any questions at all? Or anything I can tell you any more about? I'm always told I should wait 8 seconds for a response when people are typing. So there's a little clock going in my head. All right, well, I didn't go over by too much here. I'll just stop sharing my screen maybe and pass it on back to Chet.
Okay, so my name is Donovan Thiesson, and forgive for my pacing. I'm on a cell phone when I do this. I don't have a laptop, so just standing in my room here. I'm not a mycologist, but I have been picking edible mushrooms in Saskatchewan for a very long time. I started as a very young child with my grandmother, and many years later, after she had passed away for some time, I found some old books on mushroom picking and I got back into it. So I've been doing that about 7 years or perhaps more now, and it's been quite a passion of mine. So I've been asked to do a presentation on picking edible mushrooms in Saskatchewan. Now, there's an awful lot of mushrooms in Saskatchewan that can actually kill you. So doing a presentation on how to be successful in mushroom picking in 30 minutes is like asking someone to do a presentation on hang gliding in 30 minutes. It's just not an easy task. So what I've done is I've picked out the mushrooms that I feel are a cross-section of the safest mushrooms to pick, as well as common species with a high rate of occurrence, and our choice edibles, mushrooms that I would consider to be well above quality culinary-wise in comparison to a button mushroom that you get from the store. So I'm just going to start with a few fungi facts for beginner pickers, because I'm going to make the assumption that most people here aren't experienced mushroom pickers. So Saskatchewan has upwards of 150 species of wild mushroom that are edible, that are known to be edible. It has probably about 60 or 70 species that are known to be toxic, and I would say anywhere from 700 to 900 species where it's just not known one way or another in terms of their edibility. So that's an awful lot of species. And the sad fact is we don't really know how many species or what species are even occurring in Saskatchewan, because there's not a whole lot of information in those regards as of yet. Hopefully that will change with the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group's efforts. Wild mushrooms are always safe to touch. So often when people get started picking, they're afraid to touch something because it might be poisonous. But there is no mushroom that is proven to actually cause any sort of irritation or damage to your skin. Toxic mushrooms have to be fully ingested in order for them to hurt you. Most edible mushrooms are actually not edible when you first pick them. Most mushrooms are mildly toxic. Some are even moderately toxic, such as morels. If you know anything about picking morels, if you don't cook them before you eat them, you'll actually get quite sick. As well, all mushrooms contain chitin, and that is not digestible. You have to actually cook the mushroom to break the chitin down. So with that in mind, it's also important to remember that all mushrooms have their own unique potential to cause an allergy. So any mushroom you pick, you could be allergic just to that specific mushroom if you're not allergic to mushrooms in general. And some mushrooms actually have much higher allergy potential than others, so much so that a lot of guidebooks will actually consider them to be toxic, because they'll have, say, like a 10 or 20% chance of causing a reaction in someone. So with those two things there in mind, when you're eating mushrooms for the very first time, I always advise never to eat large amounts for the first time, or to eat multiple species, because you may be allergic to one of those species and you don't want to have to go through that process again to see which one made you sick. And you should always be certain of a mushroom's identification before you eat it. And there are ways to go about doing that. I think the internet is probably the best resource that you can have, because there's a lot of forums where experienced mycologists will weigh in on what it is you have if you've taken appropriate photographs. Because as I've already mentioned, some mushrooms can kill you. So just going to get started here. I've picked about 8 species. And these are, again, species where there are any toxic lookalikes to worry about. They are choice edibles, and they have a high occurrence rate in Saskatchewan. And as well, I've picked a couple species at the end here that are a bit more for intermediate pickers, but they are kind of the cornerstones of the hobby. So the first mushroom that we're going to look at is the Combs tooth mushroom, and this is Hericium coralloides. That's quite a beautiful mushroom there. Looks like Christmas time. So what I would look for when I'm looking to ID this mushroom is I would look for the following features in terms of physical features. So it is white in color, and it becomes tan with age, and that tanning starts at the tips and goes into the central area of the mushroom. It has numerous branches that extend out from one large central branch. Spines line each branch, and they jut in all directions. And as they grow longer, they grow up to about 1 inch, and as they grow longer, they start to droop downwards. You can see that starting to happen here, especially on the bottom portion of that picture, they're starting to droop downwards. And those spines are very soft, they're not pointy. And then the whole mushroom is very firm, but soft, and then it becomes a bit tougher with age, but it is just as edible regardless. In terms of its ecology, what you would look for is that this grows directly upon decaying hardwood. So I would look for it on decaying birch and on decaying poplar, for sure, in Saskatchewan. It's preferential to damp conditions and kind of darker areas, shaded areas. So you wouldn't see this out in the sun. You would see this in a shadowy area, often logs that are kind of laying on the ground and have other logs over top of them. This is found midsummer through fall, and this is common in Saskatchewan's mixed and deciduous woodlands. For eating this mushroom, it is one of the most delightful things you can eat. It is excellent fried in butter. It makes a great dish on its own as opposed to just a side or in a sauce or something like that. And this is actually also very easy to cultivate. It's closely related to lion's mane, which a lot of people are cultivating now. The next mushroom I'm going to talk about is the hedgehog mushroom, Hydnum repandum. I put Hydnum CF repandum, and I'll explain why a little bit here at the end. So this is a yellow to orange mushroom. Sometimes it will be white. It has a lot of variability that way in terms of its shade and its coloration. It is convex, becoming flat with age. Sometimes it will have a central depression, and the margin around the cap there, like the outer edge, will turn upwards and become wavy like you're seeing there. When you look straight down on it, the profile will range from round, like what you would expect with a mushroom, to this completely eccentric shape. So it has a lot of variability there as well. Beneath the cap are soft yellow spines, and the stipe is pale yellow to white. So this is mycorrhizal with a whole bunch of different types of trees. Again, a lot of variability. So both deciduous and coniferous trees. It's found throughout the woodlands of Saskatchewan. This is found midsummer through fall. And they'll often be scattered, sometimes forming an arc or what's called a fairy ring. So why is there so much variability in this mushroom? Because we don't actually really know what species occur here. Hydnum repandum is a European species. It doesn't occur in North America. Instead, we have a whole bunch of species that macroscopically are identical with slight variation to Hydnum repandum, but there would require a whole lot of gene sequencing and microscopic work to figure out what actually occurs here and to actually name them. This mushroom also has a very sweet taste. If you cook it, it's nothing like what you get from a button mushroom in a store. And you probably noticed that the mushrooms we're looking at so far don't really resemble what we commonly associate as a mushroom. It doesn't have what's called that agaric structure, where you have a stem or a stipe going up, and then a cap on the top, and then gills underneath the cap. Most of the mushrooms we're going to look at don't actually have gills. And the reason for that is because most of the really, really toxic ones are gilled mushrooms. So when I'm going to make a presentation for beginners like I have here, I'm going to avoid gilled mushrooms almost completely, because this hedgehog mushroom that we're looking at has no toxic lookalikes whatsoever, just other hedgehog mushrooms. The next one that we're going to look at is a series of 2 to 4 species. We're not really sure how many species actually occur in Saskatchewan. These are called red cap bulletae. I believe the main species here is Lycinum insigne and Lycinum aurantiacum. So that would be the aspen bulletae and the orange birch bulletae. So in terms of the ID features, the cap is a brick red to orange to sometimes almost like a yellow in color. it is spherical when very young. So when I say spherical, what I mean is that the cap is almost a complete circle, and the margins of the cap actually touch the stipe. And that protects the porous surface there from any damage while it's developing. And then it becomes convex and it flattens out with age. This is very firm when young. Then it becomes spongy at maturity, or if it's been rained on, if it gets waterlogged. Underneath, you'll notice there are no gills. What we have is a white porous surface beneath the cap. And it turns brown with age, but if you were to touch it with your finger and kind of push into it a bit, it would bruise, and it would bruise a gray to purple color. That stipe there, which is like the stalk, is club-shaped. It's very thick at the base and then thinner at the apex. And it has these kind of raised, what we call scaber scales that are brown, and that's over an off-white color base there. And if you damage that stipe, it will turn blue. So these are mycorrhizal again. They have associations with aspen, birch, and oak, which is about the only way to tell the difference between the different species of red-capped bolete. They are scattered to gregarious. I find these a lot in Saskatchewan, especially on the Wildwood Golf Course. In the wooded areas, they're just everywhere. These are very, very common in Saskatchewan. These are best picked when young or in the spring or fall, so as to avoid maggots, because maggots love these even more than we do. So if you pick them when they're very young, they're still very firm and it's hard for the insects to get into it. Or if it's relatively cold out, like it's just the beginning of June, the insects have yet to really get established. And then the best way to eat this mushroom is to slice it and then dehydrate it so that it's crispy like a cracker. And then when you want to make a sauce or a soup, you just reconstitute it. And what happens is the flavor becomes more intense after the dehydration. So the next mushroom I'm going to share with you is the stump puffball, Apioperdon pyriform. This is a very common mushroom in Saskatchewan. So this mushroom is off-white to brown, and it darkens with age. It is round, or it is shaped like an upside-down pear. They're smooth to begin with, but then they become wrinkled, especially around the base of the fruiting body where it's attaching to the wood. So on the lower portion there. It does not have gills, once again. What it has instead is an internal structure where spores develop, and that's called a gleba. So if you cut this mushroom in half, it'll just be a solid white, almost like you've cut a marshmallow. But over time, that will turn tan and then green. Once it gets to the tan stage, it's no longer considered edible. It's actually quite gross. It won't hurt you, but it's really, really gross. So these are saprobic, growing directly upon decaying hardwood. And they grow in dense clusters. You can see it there. These are found throughout the woodlands of Saskatchewan. They're very common, especially in late summer and after heavy rainfalls. So with this mushroom, anybody who's picked mushrooms knows that there are other types of puffball in Saskatchewan. Most of them are white and they grow on the ground. The problem with these mushrooms is that they can be mistaken for what we call eggs of Amanita mushrooms. And some Amanita mushrooms are very, very toxic. And when they are in their early stages, they are covered with what's called a universal veil, which is just this white membrane that covers the whole structure and looks just like a puffball. So if you accidentally pick that and eat it, you can get very, very sick. But this one grows on wood, and no Amanita grows on wood, so there is no mistaking this mushroom for anything else. And these are, my favorite way to cook them is in scrambled eggs. I just love them. So the next mushroom we're going to look at is one that most people don't really know about when they're out picking mushrooms to begin with. This is called the pestle mushroom. It's Clavaria delphis truncatus. Now, this mushroom is closely related to chanterelles. It is very sweet and fairly common in Saskatchewan. So it's orange to yellow, becoming paler towards the base. It's just one structure. There's no independent stipe or cap or anything like that. It is club-shaped, as you can see, with a flat or cup-like top. In the background, you can see younger ones are kind of convex at the top. And the one in front of us is flat, and it will actually have a depression in the middle there as it grows older. And the upper portion from about where the lighter color meets the darker color, that's all hollow. There should be a taper towards the base, as you can see here. And it is longitudinally wrinkled. And it becomes more wrinkled on that outer surface with age. And that's where the spores are forming us along those wrinkles. So this is mycorrhizal with conifers, but I only ever find this in moss. And one of the things about this mushroom is that it can be a bit difficult to see because often the whole structure is beneath the moss except for the top of that fruiting body with the cup there that's going to collect rainwater, and then the raindrops knock the spores around. So if you do see one, there's going to be more. You just have to look around real hard and then gently push down on the moss to see if the other ones pop up. And this occurs summer through fall. It's got a very sweet taste again. It's good to dehydrate and reconstitute. Doesn't lose any flavor. So the next mushroom here is one that I think a lot more people will be familiar with. This is the oyster mushroom. I've picked the most common of the species, which is Pleurotus austriatus, but actually have about 5 or 6 species of oyster in the province. So this mushroom is white to light gray or light brown, and then becoming more tan or brown with age. It is fan, kidney, round, or eccentric in terms of its profile, so it has a lot of variability in its shape. It often forms shelf-like clusters. If you saw that prior photo, you can see there's a shelf-like cluster here. So it's convex at first, like what we just saw, and then the margins turn upwards and become, it develops this fairly significant funnel shape like what you're seeing. And the gills are white and they run down the stipe. That's important to note for this species. And that stipe is off-center or attached to the cap from the side often. This is a saprobic mushroom growing directly upon decaying hardwoods. So there is a potential look-alike, but that one only grows on conifers and is very rare in the province. This occurs spring through fall, and this is found throughout Saskatchewan's woodlands and basically anywhere that you'll find rotting hardwood. So I often visit my brother's wood pile in the city because he has tons of these growing off of it. And I've also made myself a little mushroom garden where I've taken logs and sticks that I've found with these mushrooms growing off them. I've cut that piece out and just taken it home because they'll keep fruiting over and over throughout the spring through the fall, and they'll occur year after year. So I've got about 8 logs in my little garden now. And this has a very variable odor, so that's one way you can tell as well. When you pick it, just give a sniff to the base and it'll be one of 3 odors. Either it'll smell like the button mushrooms at the store, or it'll smell kind of fishy, but not gross fishy. And more often than not in Saskatchewan, I find they smell like anise seed or black licorice. So good smells all the way around. This next one is very common on your lawn. This is the shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus. So this is white to off-white in color. It blackens from the margin of the cap upwards. It is ovoid in shape, so like an oval, as you can see, expanding outwards quickly like an umbrella. So when it opens up, this is very soft yet firm when you touch it. And it has these large, soft, raised scales that are very shaggy, especially at the top of the mushroom. See if we can see that in the, not really, but you can see them going down the side there. The gills are white, but they're concealed when young. They turn black through a process of autodigestion called deliquescence. And this is usually happening, as you can see on the left, before the mushroom even opens up. So once it opens up, those gills should no longer be white. And within a day, they'll just turn to black inky goo. The stipe or stalk is white and hollow. And this is a fairly big mushroom. It grows up to about 9 inches high, 3 inches across if it opens up. You can see these ones are starting to open, but they've already started to turn to liquid. These are saprobic. You find them in grassy areas like your lawns, parks. A very common place to find this mushroom is on the grassy margins around woodlands. And then these are found late summer and fall. So this is an excellent mushroom to eat. It's one of the best mushrooms, I think, to eat. The problem with it is that it has a very, very short shelf life, because once you pick it, that process of autodigestion kicks into high gear, and by evening time, they'll often just be a puddle. But you can extend their shelf life by soaking them in ice cold water for about 20 minutes and then refrigerating them. And that should give you about 2 days. But unfortunately, this will never be a commercial venture for someone. I eat these in craft dinner. That's my favorite way to eat them. This is a beautiful mushroom here. This is the indigo milk cap. And right now I'm actually looking at mushrooms that have are beginning to have commercial value as well. These are mushrooms that people pick and sell. So this is the indigo milk cap, Lactarius indigo. So the cap is blue in color with concentric bands staining green. It has a convex shape when young, and kind of a depression as it grows older in the middle that you can see there. I'll go back to this one here. It's very firm. It would have the firmness almost like a carrot if you were to try to snap it in half. The gills are blue, as you can see there, and they bruise green if you damage them. And when you damage those gills, younger specimens will exude a blue liquid that turns green after being exposed to air. And this is called latex. And it's also sometimes called milk. So this is why they call them milk caps. The stipe is solid when young. That's the stalk. But as it grows older, it becomes hollow. And you can see on the right, some of these are staining green because they've grown old or something's damaged them or bruised them. These are mycorrhizal with jack pine, and they're found throughout the coniferous woodlands of Saskatchewan and the mixed, if there's jack pine. So these are a summer species and a fall species, scattered to gregarious, and they are delicious. They have a peppery taste. It's a very different flavor profile than most people are familiar with when it comes to mushrooms. These are best picked when young because when they're older, they get a little bitter. This is another one that has significant commercial potential. This is the King Porcini, Boletus edulis. Highly sought after in Europe. The cap is brown to reddish brown in color. It has a smooth cuticle. So when I say cuticle, I mean there is a layer covering the top, and that's called the cuticle. It's like the skin, but that cuticle becomes wrinkled, and you can see it wrinkling there a bit. So the shape is convex. It flattens out, but never becomes fully flat. You can see that here if you look at the one in the background, how it's still broadly got that broad sort of convex top. And then the undersurface is off-white. It's porous, kind of like the red cap polites that we already saw. Then it becomes tan and then yellowish green when it's past maturity. Individual pores are angular. If you look real closely to them, they won't be round. They'll be more of a honeycomb shape. And that stipe is very club shaped. And it's cream in color with a reticulate net-like pattern over top. So this is mycorrhizal with conifers and oak. It is found in the fall, and it occurs throughout Saskatchewan's boreal forests, as well as a few wooded areas in the southeast where there might be bur oak available. This is a very solitary mushroom. Sometimes you'll find groupings of it, but often you'll just find one, which is why it is so sought after, because anything, and you'll probably have noticed that I say that a lot of these mushrooms are mycorrhizal. Because they have mycorrhizal associations with trees, you cannot cultivate them inside like you can a button mushroom. You have to go out and pick them from the wild, which is why they fetch such a hefty price. These are very good for dehydrating. And like I said, they're of significant commercial value. So the next mushrooms that we'll be looking at, these are the morels. We have numerous species of morels, but we're just using kind of what I call type species, is Morchella esculentoides and Morchella angusticeps for the black and the yellow, because they have the same macroscopically similar features to all the other yellow morels and black morels out there. So they do not have a cap. They have instead what's called an asci, and this is like a sac-like structure. And it ranges in color from yellow to tan to gray to black, depending on the actual species. It can be ovoid, like an oval, or conical, kind of like an upside down ice cream cone. And it's hollow. The spores are produced in these honeycomb shaped pits that you can see there. The stipe are cream to tan in color and hollow, and it has this sort of cartilaginous feel to it. So these are both saprobic and mycorrhizal, depending on its stage of life. They'll be mycorrhizal in a forest, and then after a forest fire, that's when they'll fruit in great quantity, and they become saprobic at that point. These are preferential to burnt out areas. They're also preferential to areas with elm or ash present. These are difficult to spot in the leaf litter. And these are found fairly early in the spring, from May until about late June. These are good for dehydrating. And again, as most of you probably know, this is of significant commercial value. So there are lookalikes for morels that are very toxic. And this is what I tell people when they're asking, how do I tell the difference between a morel and what's called a false morel, which can potentially kill you? And if you can determine the difference between a honeycomb and a human brain, then you can determine the difference between these two mushrooms. That's a morel on the left. That's a false morel on the right. Take a good close look. One of them has pits that look like a honeycomb. The other one is wrinkled like a brain and really doesn't have any pitting at all. So that's how you tell. If you can't tell, leave it alone. The last mushroom I want to look at is another one of significant commercial potential. That is the chanterelle, Cantharellus sabarius. This is an orange mushroom to yellow in terms of its color, and then it gets a bit lighter down the stipe. The top of the cap is broadly convex to flat to shallowly depressed. The margin, as you can see around the cap, is turned downwards. It's very firm to the touch. It's not flaccid. It does not have gills. Those look like gills, but those aren't actually gills. They're simply ridges in the structure itself, as opposed to an independent gill structure. And those ridges, if you look, are forked. That's not very common to see in gills. And the stipe will peel apart, kind of like string cheese. These are mycorrhizal with oak, jack pine, perhaps other hardwoods. It's not really known. Once again, this is a type species, and there are likely several species that just look the same in the province. These have been noted to be found in association with reindeer moss in Saskatchewan. These occur midsummer through fall, and these are usually found scattered in the forest. Not a very good mushroom to dehydrate. They tend to lose a lot of flavor, but it is still of significant commercial value. There is a toxic look-alike. So we have a chanterelle on the left, and we have the jack-o'-lantern mushroom on the right, Neufeld illudens, that contains a toxin muscarine, as well as several others. It will make you very, very sick. Luckily, jack-o'-lantern mushroom is very preferential to oak and hardwoods. It grows directly off of wood, so that's a telling feature right there. And really, there's not a whole lot of oak occurring in the province. So if you're picking up in the boreal forests, you're not going to really see this mushroom at all. So I started the group Saskatchewan Mushroom Picking to help with creating a community of people in this hobby in the province. As well, I'm a part of the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group. Both of these are on Facebook. So I would encourage you, if you want to actually learn more about this hobby and how to do it safely, that you join both. And that's everything. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Donovan? Feel free to type into the chat.
There we go. That's how you do it.
We're just seeing a bunch of comments here.
Yeah, up in Fish Creek. It'd be a lot of species. Like I said, there's about 150, at least, known species that are edible. Some of them are terrible to eat, but there's at least 80 to 90 that are quite excellent. In terms of books, there's some problems that I run into with books. There is one called Mushrooms of the Boreal Forest that is from Saskatchewan. All the pictures in it are from Prince Albert National Park. But the problem with that book is that it's outdated now, and some of the species that are in there that are listed as edible are now known to be quite toxic. They just have toxins that take a long time to build up in your body. And I think it's because recently it has been determined that a lot of the species that we thought had occurred here, we only assumed what those species were because they were just the same as what was occurring in Europe. But with all the genetic testing that's been going on now, we now know that none of the species are the same pretty much, and they all have variability in terms of edibility, toxicity, and things on a microscopic level. But the Audubon guide to mushroom picking is pretty good. Another problem I find with books is that you're going to get books about the Pacific Northwest where they're talking about Canada, but they end at the Rocky Mountains. And then you'll get books talking about the East, but they end at Manitoba. So again, there's a problem there. Sure. One thing you can do too, I am doing a presentation or a series of presentations that's much more in depth. And I provide the presentations as well as PDFs to anybody who asks for them. I've got about 45 that I'm going to be doing, and they're just being released into the Facebook group, Saskatchewan Mushroom Picking, and the Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group. But the names that I brought up was red cap volatilus is a big one in the province. Pestle mushrooms. Shaggy manes, of course. Now I'm having this big memory fart. Do you want me to just type the names into the chat?
It's a lot of information to go over. we
Yeah.
are recording this so people can watch this presentation again, and I think that's going to be really useful because, yeah, it is a lot to try and take in, right? It's like you said, trying to teach somebody how to hang glide in half an hour. So this is just a primer. This is just to kind of get you interested, and you know, hopefully, when we're all allowed to get together and have a field trip. When we do go into the boreal or, you know, into some of those better mushroom picking areas, we'll have to ask you along, and then you can do the color commentary on the mushrooms as we go. I think that'd be a fantastic trip.
Yeah, sure. There's a good question here, actually. Does one have to be worried about what is in the substrate before eating the edible mushrooms? Yes, especially any of the bolotes, the ones that have the porous underbelly, because for some reason, these ones bioaccumulate heavy metals a lot more than others. As well, anything growing in the cities. I do a lot of city picking, where I'll go from lawn to lawn looking for edible mushrooms like shaggy manes, but some of these mushrooms really love to bioaccumulate things like Roundup. So it's good. What I like to do is I like to look for people who are out in their lawns and then ask them first if I can pick the mushrooms and ask them what they are using on their lawns, because it actually can make them toxic. Mushrooms in a compost should be fine. Heavy metals are a big one. Anything growing next to a very, very busy highway, it can take components of the exhaust. But other than that, if you're not using any like pesticides or herbicides on your lawn, then you should be fine. Okay, so that one book does cover that's the is it of the Northwest or the Pacific Northwest? So the vast majority of guidebooks I've seen have been the Pacific Northwest. Aquatic mushrooms? Yes, there are. Yeah, there are some aquatic mushrooms in the Pinellas, or yeah, I think the Pinellas genus and a couple others. But they're not very common. Okay, yeah, Northwest, that's good. I'd have to look that book up. If you want to find something similar to a book that is updated frequently, there is a website called mushroomexpert.com. You can go through many, many North American species there. And as the information about mushrooms changes, it can be it's literally updated daily. And it has very good identification criteria for you to use, but it never goes over whether things are edible or not. And you're going to find that a lot too with online sources. They just don't want the liability. Oh, I'm not sure. I know the names of some of the toxins. I know, like I said, I'm not a mycologist. Amatoxins, there's a group of amatoxins. The most sustainable way to harvest mushrooms, I would say growing indoors for certain species. It really depends on the type of mushroom you want to grow. I'm not a big advocate for people, because you can grow indoors just in tubs or bags, or you can grow outdoors by inoculating wood. The problem I have with people going outdoors and inoculating wood is often they'll use species that are not native to the province or the area. If you're going to do so outdoors, like I have some hardwoods in my backyard here that are decaying, and I've inoculated them with Combs tooth, as opposed to trying to order lion's mane or anything like that, because the Combs tooth is native here, and I actually take the spores from Combs tooth mushrooms that I pick in the province, right? No, there's no difference. Picking the mushroom does not disturb enough of the mycelium to make any difference at all. In fact, what is now known is that when you pick a mushroom, it actually just refruits often in a thicker quantity often within a week. And cutting, again, that does nothing, doesn't really do anything. There's no, this has been a big debate, but there have been some studies done, particularly on morels, that have just said that it doesn't matter. One reason that some people, though, cut at the base is so that they don't get dirt in their baskets. But I will also mention, when you're actually getting into picking agarics, so that's mushrooms with gills, some of the only ways to determine species is by looking at the very base of the stipe. So if you're cutting and not looking at the base, you may miss a feature that could differentiate this mushroom between an edible one and a lethal one, particularly when you're looking at the Amanita genus. Yep. Yeah, we have some bracket fungi that are edible here. The one that is the most common in the province is probably the hexagonal pored mushroom. It tastes like dirt or ashes. It's not very good to eat, but there are people that do eat them. I don't know how they cook them. I've tried it a couple times and I just said never again, but they are edible. There are some mushrooms in the province that people use on a medicinal basis, such as they make teas with it. Turkey tail is not very common here, but there are close relatives like Traumates pubescens that occur here in great numbers that have similar benefits, and people can use that to make a tea. The birch polypore is being studied for potential medicinal benefits, and people also use that to make a tea. There's chaga that occurs here that isn't a mushroom, but it is a fungus, and that is known to have certain benefits as well. The resinous polypore is edible. People do eat that one. Quite a few, actually. One thing to mention about bracket fungi, though, there is this mistaken belief that there are no toxic polypore fungi, and that is actually false. There is one in the province that is very toxic, and that is the cinnamon polypore, Haplophilus nigilans. It actually makes your urine turn purple, violet purple. It does some significant damage to your kidneys. That was a lot of questions. Did I miss any?
That was a lot of questions. That's great. I'm glad so many people are engaged with wanting to learn about mushrooms and mushroom picking. So and
yeah,
equally great answers. So thank you. That's just a ton of knowledge.
Well, there was the question, I think the most important question was about the toxins. And I did a presentation that's recorded called Mushroom Edibility and Toxicity that's on YouTube, that goes over some of the toxin types. And you could take those types and look further at like the chemical breakdowns of them. Again, you would just need to go to the Facebook group, or you can look up. I'm not sure if you can actually just look them up directly on YouTube or not. I should probably look into that. But I wish I had better answers for that. But I will say that there are at least 15 species that I would consider to be fatal in the province. Some are very common, some are not common, like the death cap is not common here. The destroying angel is not common, and those are the ones that people really watch out for. But there are some that are just as lethal that are very common. And the amatoxins especially basically melt your liver and kidneys. So it's not a fun way to go. Yeah, if you want to pick a mushroom, then what I recommend you do is go to either the Mycological Working Group or the Saskatchewan Mushroom Picking and Join. And when you find a mushroom, you want to photograph it kind of at a downward angle. And then you want to photograph the nearby trees, and you want to photograph it from the side. And then you have to pick it so you can photograph the base of the stipe and the gills. If you don't pick it, you can't really expect an accurate identification. And you post those photos online and the dates, and I usually respond within like a couple hours, and there's a whole lot of other people that have really good identification skills on there too. And what they'll do is they'll tell you where to look, what they think it is, and you can kind of better look it up. Because if you've got a guidebook that's just all of North America, you have to go through 10,000 species, you know, maybe you'll find one that looks similar, but maybe you'll find one that looks way more similar that was toxic. And that's a problem with books if they're not localized to your area. Sorry, I hope I didn't take up too much time.
No, that's okay. No, the presentation actually ended more or less on time, and it's just that people have been so engaged with questions and comments, which is perfect. This is exactly what we want to happen. Oh, there's one more that came in. Ingrid wants to know, can you repeat where to post the photos for ID?
Yeah, for sure. You want to join this group on Facebook? I'll just type it in there. Oh, my typing skills are off. I'm actually moving today to another town, so I've been up all night. Saskatchewan mushroom.
Andy's doing it on a phone.
Yeah.
There you are, Saskatchewan mushroom picking.
So if you go there, I made a big post, and this is also on the group simply called Saskatchewan Mycological Working Group that Jacey kind of admins. And it's posted at the top, and it goes through the information, and there's quite a lot of information. But if you have all of these points, the chances of you having a safe identification increase with each point that you make, right? If you just take one blurry photo from a distance, I'm going to tell you maybe it's a mushroom, right? That's all I can do. But if you have all the points of reference, very easy. Oh, I think that just posted to the panelists into all. Yeah, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
I don't know what you mean. Do you want me to write something? How do I do that?
Oh, Saskatchewan mushroom picking was just to Ingrid and then all panelists, but not to all participants. Okay.
How do I do that? I have no idea.
That's okay. I can put that down for you.
Oh, I see.
There you go.
So I'm going to put my email.
That's to all panelists and all attendees. There you go.
Yeah, if you have questions, you can email me, and then Saskatchewan mushroom picking. I spelled that wrong. Oh my God. There we go.
There you go. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the presentation and for this incredible amount of information. And good luck with the move.
All right.
I really appreciate you taking the time out of a very busy day.
It's my pleasure.
And very busy night, it sounded like, as well, packing and everything. So yeah, here's hoping for warmer days soon so that we can all be out looking at mushrooms. So yeah, I really encourage everybody to join those different forums and get engaged with learning more. This will end this session on foraging. We're going to take a break for lunch. You can either just stay on, nothing's going to happen until 1:30, or I think you can disengage and then use your participant link to re-engage. We will recommence at 1:30. And just to let the speakers from this morning know, normally if this was an in-person thing, I'd be giving you a speaker gift. That will be mailed to you. So Donovan, I'll reach out to you to get your new address, and you'll get a speaker gift. So thank you to all of this morning's presenters, and I will see everybody back at 1:30. Have a good lunch. Go eat some mushrooms.
And I have to say, your next speaker, Brenda, was a big part of helping me get that back, because she guided me and made that possible. So just a big shout out to Brenda since she's here. So yeah, we're going to talk fairly quickly today because we don't have a ton of time. Thank you for asking me to be here. It's always cool to, you know, speak to different people. I guess we're kind of meeting. It's a different way of meeting. I wish we were all sitting around a kitchen table and drinking tea and having a conversation. But this is the way we do it for now. And I think soon we will be back around sitting in a circle and doing these things in person again. So thank you so much for the invitation. I will get right to it. So typically now I would talk about my background, but that's been done. So the only thing that I want to add to that is, so I'm a teacher. I grew up in Hinton, a couple doors down from my grandma. And my grandma was a Cree woman, and she was very proud of her knowledge and her cultures and shared that with, in particular, her grandchildren. And, but what I noticed, you know, I'd go to her house and she'd make us tea. I'd go out berry picking with her and she'd be really happy to show us the plants and the medicines. But if we were out in public, it was a very different story. And that different person that I saw in public was someone who was afraid and ashamed and scared. And she would do things like put lemon juice in our hair to say we have to lighten our hair. She would tell me if we were in town that I had to pretend I didn't know her. So I just accepted this as a child and didn't know till much later in life that the fear, shame, and just negativity she had around sharing those teachings and her culture was there for a reason. And I learned that my mom and two of her sisters had been taken away from my grandma, put in residential school. And I think that was just so damaging to her, and she was so worried about her grandkids. So she had that fearful part, but then she had this other part where she just really wanted to teach us all the things that she knew and shared that with us. So it was very intriguing to me, you know, like at that point in my life when I finally sort of understood it, that I started my business really in honor of our grandma, because I wanted to, you know, just help carry on that teaching that she started with us. So yeah, it really was done in her honor. And the other piece before I go into this, I always say, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. I'm not a medicine woman. I'm not here to talk about the spiritual properties of the plants. I'm pretty, you know, on the surface. I have that cosmetic background. And I think our medicine woman of the family truly is Brenda. So you guys have the privilege of listening to her next. I'm more, I guess, on the, you know, business of funner things. I mean, sweetgrass candles and lotion aren't exactly traditional items, but I do love my tea and I do love the plants. So that's what we're talking about today. And I'm going to go through a couple slides just talking about some protocol. And then I think there's about 9 different plant slides that we will just look at these plants and discuss some of the sort of mainstream knowledge that I've learned along the way, maybe learned from grandma, different areas that I've teaching at a Misquitchie and working with the elder there was amazing. So I'll share that. And then I have some recipes that I can email out to you that come from the book. I'll show them to you really quickly, but you won't have time to write them down. I can email them out to anyone who's interested. So that's sort of the rundown of our next 30 minutes or less. So. Sorry, guys. My lack of technology knowledge. Can you hear me now? Yeah, all good? Okay, so just a disclaimer, I just wanted to say that, again, I'm not a medicine person, I'm not a doctor, and to take what I'm saying with the knowledge that check with your medical practitioner before using any of the medicines or the plants, because some of them are extremely powerful and can interact with some medications, and I'm not here to talk about that. And that, you know, we have to be careful what we're picking when we're picking it. And I know there's certain plants that can be toxic after frost. There's certain times, you know, plants are being sprayed, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of that. So that's just the slide to cover my butt. I'm struggling a little bit with my slides here. There we go. This is a picture of the elder I worked with at Amiskwichi, and he was just an amazing teacher. And it's just one of the teachings that he shared with me was when wanting to know more, wanting to get that spiritual teachings or that knowledge in, you know, more traditional knowledge, is to speak to an elder if you have the privilege of having connections to an elder or a medicine person, and to give tobacco. And Francis taught me to do that from my left hand side of my heart, just as a way to make a request or to just, you know, connect with the elder and give that tobacco offering. He also taught me about making that same offering when picking, and to only take what we need. Be respectful of Mother Earth, of course, take what we need. And he taught me about offering tobacco, giving thanks to Mother Earth, giving thanks to the plant when you're picking it, which I thought was just lovely. And how lovely to be able to be that much more connected to our own healing through picking our own medicines. And it's really easy, I always think, to walk into a health food store and buy herbs or go online, and that's handy, but what a gift to be able to do it ourselves if we can, and if we know what we're picking and having all those safety pieces in place. But I think just taking that time to be present and give the tobacco is just a lovely thing for us to be able to do. Okay, so our first plant, blueberry, and the elusive blueberry, I always have trouble finding these. I don't know what it is. I can find Saskatoons like crazy, but I never have much luck finding blueberries. But such a beautiful plant. And what I've learned through my cosmetic side is, you know, you think of back in the day when we would make pemmican, and taking the berries and pounding them with the rocks and then mixing in the dry meat and the fats or whatever people use to make pemmican. And it makes sense to me that when we think of the berry, we often don't notice, especially blueberries, the tiny little seeds in the blueberry are almost indistinguishable. But inside those seeds, I've learned that all the berries, they have the seed oil inside the seeds, right? And what a beautiful, nutritious, super high in antioxidant treasure the berry seed oil is. And because I come from the cosmetic industry, I say, if you're a person who goes to the department store and spends $70 or $80 on an eye cream, your best bet is to go into a Costco and buy blueberry seed oil capsules and use that, because it'll be, number one, way more efficient, or effective rather, for treating your skin problems. And way cheaper and completely safe. And if it's edible, then it's definitely safe to put on your skin. So high in antioxidants, great for anti-aging, eye health, heart health, all of those things in berries, and all sorts of vitamins and minerals as well. We use a lot of berries in our tea, one of our teas. I make a berry blend tea, which is just all fruit and blueberries, and it's quite delicious. Elderberry is a new one for me that I never really worked with until the beginning of the pandemic, and was getting many requests from people to purchase elderberry. And I noticed in places like Shoppers Drug Mart, I was seeing a lot of elderberry products on the shelf as well. So elderberry syrup as a cough syrup for young children with chemical-free, and supposedly very good for strengthening the immune system. So I thought that was interesting, and I started accessing some elderberries, and we sell them just dried as a tea. People use it as a tea or making that syrup. And apparently not good to eat just fresh off the tree. They're not great for your stomach, but in the tea or in the syrup, they're quite effective for that immune system and coughs and colds. So lots of interest in this plant right now. Labrador tea, we call that muskeg tea around here. You'll often find this growing in a wet area, really mossy, usually under spruce trees, and very distinct with that orange fuzz on the back. It's very dark, rusty color. And probably none of us kids knew why our grandma would make us this at night. And it is very sedative. So I guess it was a way to get us all to go to sleep better. But it's a nice calming sedative plant. It can be used in some products for skin, especially eczema. There's some cosmetic companies using it as face serums and things like that. So it's good for the skin. Many properties around blood and liver cleansing. And it's just lovely to drink. We used to make it on the campfire. So we always enjoyed that, making the tea on the campfire. So if you need a good relaxing tea, and you can pick it year round, which I think is kind of cool. It's an evergreen shrub. You can go in even in the winter and pick off your leaves and make your tea. Okay, our raspberry leaf. This is I always like to get the wild raspberry. So anything that I use is the wild raspberry leaf. Becoming really commonly suggested by even medical practitioners around using in the last trimester of pregnancy to help strengthen the uterus, which of course is good to help with childbirth, labor, delivery. It is good because it helps to increase the milk production for the baby after childbirth. And it's good for menstrual pain. So it's a beautiful women's tea that actually tastes really lovely. One thing I do know about raspberry leaf is you'd never want to pick those leaves after a frost because they can become toxic at that point. So you want to be careful when you pick it. And I have a lot of people ask if it's, if they can use the tame raspberries in their yard. And that I never know what to say because I don't know where those plants came from, if they've been changed or altered in some way. So I feel like personally, I prefer to stick to the wild raspberry leaf. Sage is such an amazing plant all around. Like it grows super abundantly. I'm not a green thumb. I like wild crafting, but I think anyone can grow sage. You honestly do not even have to water it. It's such an easy plant that I'm filling my new backyard with sage because I can't fail with that one. So beautiful plant. I think you guys had a session today about gardening with, I forget what the name of the session was. I just read it quickly. But I was interested in that and I'm sorry that I missed it. But sage, I've been reading about the smoke. So when we smudge with sage, and we use that smoke for cleansing. So that's the whole purpose of, when we do our smudge ceremonies, different plants are used for different things. And the sage plant is always meant to be a cleansing ceremony. And that's cool because the smoke actually does help kill bacteria in the air, which is kind of, symbolic of it, the spiritual cleansing and the actual physical cleansing. It's great for women who are experiencing hot flashes because it helps to balance the estrogen production. It's really good for infections in the mouth and throat, gargling with it when you have a sore throat. and topically on the skin for skin conditions. It's just got so many properties. I make a peppermint sage shampoo, and I put that in because it helps with treating scalp conditions and with hair loss. Sage and peppermint more for the hair loss, but sage for just the scalp conditions that might be happening. So lots of uses, easy to grow, easy to dry. It's just quite an amazing plant. Okay. Stinging nettle. This I've seen on my old acreage grow up to 7 feet tall. The only creatures that would eat this that we had were goats, and goats would eat anything. But of course it has that sting to it. So not fun to pick, but the leaves are really great to throw into soups and stews. Once they're dry or cooked, there's no more sting, of course. There's lots of studies on nettle right now as different, well, anything from hair care. So I'm seeing it in hair care products. I'm seeing it's being studied for prostate enlargement. So good for men, good for skin conditions, high blood pressure, and it's high in iron. So you'll see naturopaths actually use a tincture, and I'm sure Brenda could speak to this, a tincture to help increase iron. So lots of vitamins as well. Traditionally, I've heard people using it to, at fresh plant, to tap on areas where there's a lot of pain caused by arthritis. And I think that would just help stimulate the blood flow and bring healing to the area. And then those stems are so strong and fibrous that those were used to make ropes. So woven together, or however they sort of braided or did whatever to make a really strong piece of rope from the stem of the nettle. Okay, wild mint. This is a plant that when I worked at Amiskwichi was really the plant that had me go into business and really take a look at what I wanted to do. Teaching for a living was good, and I liked the school, but I knew I was inside a box, and sitting and doing report cards and staff meetings just wasn't really feeling like what I wanted to do with my life. And we had these beautiful gardens at the school, and I managed to access some wild mint, and I had it dried in a jar. And I had this one student that would come to my class and not once connect with me, not once look up. He had his headphones on, he had his hat pulled down, he sit in the back of the class, and no connection, didn't do the work, just came and wasn't really present in the class at all. And the day that I had the wild mint, and it's got such a distinct smell, and I put it, I was carrying it around the class and getting all the kids to smell it. And he had to smell it because I put it right under his face, basically. And he looked up at me and got big tears in his eyes. And he said, "My cookum used to make me that when I was sick." And I knew we had something kind of cool, magical happen in that moment, because it reconnected him to his family in a way, like just reminded him of a pleasant time, reminded him of his family. And I thought, I want to find a way to get my students to all reconnect with their teachings, reconnect with their culture. I was sad that I didn't do that enough with my own grandma. So it became really important for me to say, how do I get these kids to reconnect with culture, with Mother Earth, with all of it? And that sort of was the real beginning of me creating a modern way, which was a business, and finding a respectful way to do that business that wasn't going to offend anyone or be disrespectful. So I give a lot of credit to this young man who I don't remember his name, and maybe one day I'll figure out who he was, because that was a powerful moment. And I think for him, just, how powerful that was, just have that smell again. And I like to think maybe it perhaps helped him with some healing that he might have needed, right? So very powerful plant for me. The beginning of that Cree word is a misk, which is the Cree word for beaver. And this plant will typically be found by ponds, by very wet areas, small lakes and stuff like that. And I always can smell it way before I find it because it's quite tiny, and you walk into an area and it's just an overpowering smell of this wild mint, distinct smell. So I certainly think that's my favorite one to talk about, wild mint. Willow bark, super abundant. I need to stick around and listen to Brenda's workshop because I think these are so similar, and I hope you will address this after Brenda, because that's something I don't know a ton about, is the poplar and yeah, just those teachings. So willow bark is high in salicin, which helps with pain relief. So arthritis, aches and pains, and anything inflammatory. It's a beautiful plant. I like mixing it with wild mint to create sort of an arthritis inflammation tea. I don't like willow bark. The taste of it on its own is not my favorite. So mixing it with the wild mint helps to relax the smooth muscles. Oh yeah, I started talking so much about wild mint, I didn't even discuss the properties. We'll have to back that up. So yeah, helps to relax. We'll go back to wild mint. Okay, the properties. Helps to relax the smooth muscles, so it can help promote relaxation. It's good for coughs, colds, fevers, and congestion. Just a beautiful one to drink when you're... I apologize for the noise. My dog is right below me doing crazy things, so excuse me while I hide her bone with my foot. It's just good for things that typically peppermint would be good for. However, not safe to drink in pregnancy. So just, you know, thinking of all the plants and the different issues and things we should be aware of, right? So this one is one of those, don't drink during pregnancy. So it mixes lovely with the willow bark for that arthritis pain relief tea. Okay. Willow bark, one of my recipes that I have is a willow bark facial treatment that you can just make from a strong willow bark tea, because of the salicin, which is a natural acid. It helps to break down the dead skin. It helps to brighten your skin, keep it looking youthful, but it also can help with acne because it helps to reduce the inflammation. So it's kind of twofold for skincare. Okay, yarrow. This is our last plant. I'm just going to check the time. Yarrow is sometimes referred to as a stinkweed. I've heard that. But again, one of those plants with so many properties. Someone at the U of A is studying it for the treatment of diabetes. It's great for digestion, stimulating the appetite. Fresh leaves rubbed on the skin for insect repellent, and traditionally was used as a poultice to help bleeding. And I know Brenda's done a first aid, she does a first aid medicine class where I'm probably thinking she probably talks a lot about yarrow in that, I would think. So many properties in yarrow that are really good for skin healing. The flowers are actually used to extract this beautiful dark blue oil that comes out of those little white flowers, and almost like the color of ink. And we use that in some of our skin salves because it's just excellent for treating psoriasis and eczema. So very, very expensive oil though, because it's so, there's such minute amounts in those flowers that you need just tons of them to get just a small amount of oil. So quite a precious oil. Okay, so that's the plants. And then I've got some recipes that, again, if you're interested, I'll share my email right at the end of this. Just shoot me a quick email and I will send you over these recipes if you're interested. That's the elderberry syrup recipe. Then just some tea blends that I've come up with. There's the cold and flu one. Pain relief, we talked about that, the wild mint and willow bark. There's a women's balance, which is great for PMS or anything hormonal that's happening. That is a little recipe on the willow bark facial treatment. So yeah, just, I think my email is right there. So you can just, oh no, my email's not there, I lied. It's Carrie, C-A-R-R-I-E at ASkyT. I'll put it into the chat after we're finished. I'll throw my email address in there. And if you'd like the recipes, like I said, just send me an email and I'll get them right back to you. So I think I did it. I did it by one. I was like, can I do this? So thanks for listening. I know it was a lot and I know it was quick. Usually I take an hour. So feel free to reach out again for the recipes, or if you have questions or stories to share, I'd love to hear them. And I will stop sharing my screen if I can figure that out and let the next speaker be on board.
That was fantastic, Carrie. Thank you so much. And you were right down to the minute for timing. It was perfect. Yeah, that was great. And while you're doing that, there are some questions that are coming in that I will field for you. There was, which part of the yarrow plant do you use for tea? Oh, I think you're muted again. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Which part of the yarrow? We actually use the whole plant, like not the roots, and then just dry and chop up the whole thing. So that's the way that I've done it all along, is just the entire plant, not just the flowers.
And then where is your book available?
Oh, here's a trick. You can get it on my ASkyT website, but I have to charge a stupid amount of shipping, which is $15, which is too much. If you happen to be in Edmonton, we're going to be opening our store, but I know Amazon, Indigo Chapters both have it online. And if you're an Amazon shopper, then there's free shipping. So,
Carrie, is Lone Pine the distributor or one of the distributors?
Yes.
So the other way you can avoid high shipping, maybe if everybody, and I'll provide my email when I give my talk at the very end, and you can just get it off the Native Plant Society website. We are a seller of Lone Pines, and I can put a book order together for Carrie's book. So anybody who wants Carrie's book, email me. And if you're in Saskatoon, there will be no shipping. And if you are outside of that, we'll just ship it at cost. I'll figure out how much it's going to cost, and we'll ship it that way. So that might help as well if you can't find it in a store, or if you think you're going to incur a lot of shipping charges, we can do that as well for you.
Nice. Nice. Lone Pine books are so amazing. I was just so honored to sit down with the owner when I had this idea for the book. And I don't know if you know who the owner is, and his name is escaping me at this moment, but he's Cree, and he's just like this fascinating man who has these incredible stories that you feel like you're sitting with, like, I don't know, he's traveled the world, he's a chef, and his grandma was almost sounded like the same person as our grandma. And his best friend was the woman who owned the body shop. So when I told him what I wanted to do, he was just like, oh, I can't even say no, because there just seems to be all these connections. So he's a super, super cool guy.
Yeah.
You know him, eh?
Oh, yeah. And when you said his name escapes me, I thought, his name escapes me too. But I do. Yeah, we get a lot of our books that we sell on our website through Lone Pine. And I don't have to deal with him very much, or I don't get to deal with him, unfortunately, very much, because there's a local rep. So it's always her that I deal with. But occasionally I do get to talk to him, and he's fantastic. Yeah, it's great. I had one question about, do you have a recommended method for processing rose hips?
I just take forever to dry them. So when I'm just doing it at home, I just lay out a towel and I just keep rotating them, right? So if it's just for your own personal use, just like on the towel and just keep moving them around so, you know, the air is always circulating. And I know the lady who does my picking for my teas, she has a nice low temperature kiln that she uses. So that's the two methods, but I find like it's pretty easy to put a lot of them on one towel and you can do quite a few at a time.
Any other questions? One of the questions was the title of the book. It's Mother Earth Plants for Health and Beauty. I'll hold it up again. There's a terrible glare, but it's because it's got a nice glossy cover on it. There it is. That's better than looking at my face. There. All right. Looks like no more questions. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Our next speaker, it's funny, I mentioned this during the break, just before we kind of officially started at 1:30 local time here, but I got an email from our next speaker saying, oh, I was looking at the agenda and I saw that Carrie was on. Carrie's my cousin. So Carrie and Brenda are cousins. I did not know that. I contacted them independently, but that's great. I will, oh, there's Brenda. Hi, Brenda.
Hello.
Oh, and just before I introduce her, so for all of the afternoon speakers who didn't hear this in the morning, because this is virtually, if this was in person, I would be handing you a speaker gift and thanking you, but I have to mail you a speaker gift. So it's in the mail. And then for Carrie and Brenda, I'm also sending a thanks of tobacco for sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you for that in advance. So Brenda will be talking to us about many things and centering on black poplar. I'll just go through her little bio in case you don't have your agenda with you. Brenda was born and raised in the Rockies in Jasper National Park, not a bad place to be, and has spent a vast amount of time trekking from valley to valley. Brenda is of Cree and Iroquois lineage and is pleased to follow her heritage as a traditional guide from the Quaraqanti of Jasper. She is a traditional knowledge keeper of plant medicine from her Cree lineage and teaches courses on plant medicine, offers unique and fun hands-on workshops on plants and their medicines, as well as doing fascinating walks into the boreal forest to explore the amazing medicines on display. So that is all about Brenda in a nutshell. And actually, Brenda, I was recommended to you by one of our board members who went on one of your hikes and thought it was great and said, oh, you have to get Brenda for the AGM. It's going to be fantastic. So take away, Brenda.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I am very happy to be here and honored that I was asked to speak. I just want to acknowledge my presence here where I'm coming from, Treaty 7 territory. So always important for us to do that land acknowledgement. And I have to say, I'm super thrilled that I got to hear Carrie's talk as well. There's so many things that she went through that just really brought me back to our youth. And Carrie and I spent a lot of time together as children, along with our sisters. And there are so many favorites that her and I both share. And as she was speaking to many of the plants, the traditional side of me was really embracing those. My science background was running through the laundry list of chemical constituents and and why they're all so good for us. But so I guess I should be sharing my screen. I'll just get that up there. I can just press share screen. Is that right? Okay. I think I'm having a hard time with this chat, trying to find my presentation here to share.
Did you press the share screen button at the bottom in your toolbar there?
Yes, I have.
And does it give you options?
Desktop, PowerPoint, there we go. All right, let's see if I can do this. try that again. I apologize.
No, it's okay. And worst case scenario, I've got your presentation, so I can run it from my end, but you'd have to prompt me to switch the slide.
I think that would be just fine. Yeah, actually, if you could do that, would be great. I had I had a few changes on there I was going to add in, but that's okay. You can send my email address out to people that are interested if you like at the end. So you can go ahead and share my.
Okay, I'll get that started here.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. So it's very difficult for me to just talk about one plant. It's hard for me to do that, but I thought the best thing for me to offer was a fair amount of knowledge just on one plant. I often tell people that we could spend many, many hours just on one single plant alone in order to really understand its properties and understand truly the magic behind the plant itself. And so as tempting as it was for me to want to talk about many different plants, I really felt it would be best suited to this group to just talk about the specifics of black poplar. So you can go on to the next slide. So black poplar is one of those plants that I have a huge love for. I'm often asked by people, what is the best medicinal in the boreal forest? And my answer is always, well, what is the best car to drive? What are the best shoes to wear? So really, it's not an easy question to answer. But what I do say is that there are 4 plants that I would never want to live without, and poplar being one of them. My love of poplar came from my kokum. You heard Carrie speak of our grandmother earlier, and there's one of the only pictures I actually have of her. Unfortunately, I lost many photographs. But I just cherish this picture of her because it is the only one that I have. And it is because of her that I had this huge love of poplar. And I'll take you through the journey of my love of poplar as we go through these slides. So you can go on to the next one, please, Chet. So why do I love poplar so much? I think about my kokum, my grandmother. And I always say she is of the trees. And this was just my own saying to myself because I don't know where the memory came from. I don't have too much of a recollection. I just remember bits and pieces that it was around the beginning of February. And I remember I was incredibly ill. I was very, very sick with a flu. And my parents were driving me to my grandmother, and I remember getting out of the car and feeling this sense of excitement because I was going to be with my grandmother. We lived about an hour away, and when I got out of the car, this incredible Chinook wind was blowing, so it was quite warm. But there was this intense smell of poplar. And when I got out of the vehicle and I went to my grandmother, of course, she was always ready with some of her remedies. And she actually gave me a tea of the poplar buds. Now, I'm not a big fan of the taste of poplar buds. Unlike Carrie, I love the taste of willow bark. I was one of those strange children that found aspirin quite delightful to eat for some strange reason. So, but poplar buds were a very, very different and intense taste for me. But the smell of the tea that she had given me was pretty incredible. I was very, very fevered and very sick. And so she gave me this tea, and it didn't take long for me to begin to feel better. So mostly it was just dealing with many of the symptoms of the flu. And but it was the scent that I kept getting over and over and over again. And over the next few days, we actually took a walk, and all I could remember was the scent of the trees, the scent of the trees. And as we were walking, I asked her a few questions about the trees themselves. She talked to me about how they were alive and how they could hear us. But mostly she said to me that they were family, that they were all connected underground by their roots. And just because you couldn't see that connection didn't mean that they weren't all related to each other. And she went into some of the teachings about how we were all connected as well. And it really made me connect the poplar trees as my family. So I didn't fully understand the teachings that she was trying to share with me in my small child's mind, but it suddenly made me realize that trees were actually part of our family. And so the poplar became one of my family members. And the scent still stays with me to this day. It's such a powerful teaching to me, just through the smell of it. So you can go ahead on to the next slide, please. So I do take people out on walks, on regular walks, and I usually will start by asking the group, how many people have heard of this wondrous and unusual food called bread? And of course, many people will put their hands up. They all have heard of bread. And then I will ask them, how many people have ever tasted this mystery wondrous food? And of course, many people will put their hands up. And then I ask, how many people like the taste of it? So I like to engage the guests into understanding something that is familiar to them, such as bread. And my next statement really wows people, because I'll tell them, did you know that in the Canadian boreal forest, we have all of the ingredients for bread? We have water, sugar, salt, yeast, and flour in the forest. And then I will invite them to come and find them. And one of the plants that contains a good number of the ingredients is actually the poplar tree. So when I talk about poplar, I'm talking about black poplar, white poplar, and I'm also talking about the birch tree. I have a love that is very equivalent amongst all three of those trees. They're all quite related. And so we will find pretty much all of these ingredients in the boreal forest. And so I will often find usually an aspen tree, so the white poplar, and take people over to it, and I will wipe off the dust from the poplar tree, and I'll ask people, who knows what this is? What gift is this from the tree? And most people will know that it has a sun protection factor of 15, so people know that it is a sunscreen. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in my presentation. But I say, yes, it is. However, it is also a form of yeast. And it's not like the normal yeast that you'll buy in the store. This is actually a healing yeast, believe it or not. It's composed of a variety of different little things, such as molds and fungi and yeast. And you can wildcraft this yeast, and in 3 to 7 days, you'll have a lovely bubbly mixture that will create enough yeast to allow you to make bread. I also will ask people if they've tried maple syrup. And pretty much everybody has tried it, of course. And then I'll ask who has tried birch syrup. And again, we'll get 1 or 2 people that have tried that. And usually when I ask if anybody's had the poplar syrup, most people do not, have never had poplar syrup. And so this is a form of sugar that the tree gifts us with. So we have a couple of strong ingredients that we can get from the poplar tree. However, the tree also can offer us baking powder, and that is within the bark, and we can utilize certain parts of the bark to extract something that's like baking powder. It's not a true baking powder, but it works very similar to baking powder. And we can also get salt from the tree too. There's a way to process that. However, there's better plants that will offer us salt, but you can certainly get salt from that plant. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So I want to move on to talking about some of the medicine that Poplar offers us. And this we call Muskegee. Muskegee is medicine. And I want to say that what I'm about to share with you right now in terms of Poplar medicine is just barely even scratching the surface. In all honesty, I truly could do a full day of teaching of the medicine from this plant. So one of my favorite things to make from the poplar tree is actually right now, this time of year, the buds are perfect for us to extract their medicine from. And you can see in the picture at the very bottom in the center, one of the buds is just simply dripping with some of the resins that are contained within the plant. And I'm going to come back to talking about those in a moment as well. But this is very potent medicine. And I was doing some programs for the Friendship Center in Calgary, and one of the elders was Gus Manybears. And I had brought some small salve samples with me that I had made from the poplar tree. Many people call that balm of Gilead, although it's similar to balm of Gilead. It's not a true balm of Gilead. The tree that the balm of Gilead is made from comes from a different country altogether. But this is similar and does very similar things. But I noticed Gus was having a hard time with his hands and he was in a lot of pain. And so I offered him a very small sample of the medicine. And I said, Gus, try the salve and see if it will work on your arthritis. And he did. He rubbed it on. And a couple days later, I came back. I was doing another program and he said it worked wonderfully. And it was very helpful for him, which was great because it doesn't help all types of arthritis, just some types. And so I had a larger container of it and I gave it to him. And about a week went by and I came back to the Friendship Center again. And the first sample that I had given him would have been enough to last at least a week or two. And so the very large one should have lasted him up to 6 months. And he said, Brenda, I need more of that medicine. And I said, my goodness, Gus, what are you doing with that medicine? Are you selling it? Selling it on me? And he said, no, he had gone to stay with his sister the night before in the city because he didn't want to drive home. And he said she came out and she was in terrible pain. One of her wrists, she was unable to turn her wrist like this. And he said, here, try this medicine. And so she rubbed the medicine in. And 10 minutes later, she came out and showed him that she could move her wrist, not only twisting it, but rotating. And it had full movement. And Gus said, so she kept it and wouldn't let me take it back. And she didn't even want to share it with me. So please, can you give me some more? So I certainly did. So one of the things that I really love about this, the poplar medicine that to me is so magical is it has a real affinity to the respiratory system. It is exceptionally great for things like throat infections, sore throats, when you have a cold and flu. I make this wonderful spray that you can actually use, and it's extremely effective. It has a real affinity for the respiratory system, as do many trees in the boreal forest. It's like magic. They will move catarrh from the lungs quite quickly and easily. And there is a lot of talk in terms of certain respiratory issues, especially things like pneumonias, that it can be very effective for, both as an external poultice as well as an internal medicine. Really helps to loosen things up in the lungs and get things moving. And of course, with cold and flu, it's great for fever. Now, there's many herbalists that will talk about not really using this for fever in children or colds and flus because the salicin that's in it is like salicins in aspirin, and that it could potentially cause problems with children, such as Reye's syndrome. From my experience, I've never seen that happen. That's not to say that it won't. of course, as the recipient of that medicine myself as a child, I never suffered Reye's syndrome. And I think it's important for us to remember that these plants are so, they're so different from our Western medicine. They're not chemical isolates like many of the medicines that we get. They have a whole host of synergistic and complementary medicines, the chemicals that are in the tree itself, that work together very harmoniously and also work in the body harmoniously. So the medicines don't often work the same way that our Western medicine works. There's not an awful lot known about that or those reactions, just because trying to study hundreds or up to thousands of medicines together in one particular plant and how they actually act in a synergistic way would be really quite a challenge. So very difficult to do. Every once in a while, I do suffer from sciatica pain, and I have found that that utilizing these buds in a tincture form is incredible. When you take willow medicine, it is incredibly powerful, but it does take a while for it to work within the human body. The poplar medicine, the buds are very rapid. And in fact, within 5 minutes, they will affect the nervous system very strongly, and they can take the sciatica pain away. Carrie mentioned the salicins in the willow. And of course, the poplar tree has salicins in it as well. And I'm going to give you a little bit of some fun trivia, perhaps, that may come up. But many people believe that aspirin came from willow. It actually did not, nor did it come from the poplar bark. So the different salicins have different names, and the one that's found in the poplar bark is known as poplin or populin. And there's another plant known as queen of the meadow or filipendula. And that salicin that's in that plant, as well as the birch spirea, the medicine or the salicin in there is known as spirea. And spirin, sorry, not spirea, spirin. And when it was chemically formulated into aspirin, they added an acetyl group to the end of it, both to stabilize the chemical and also to so it could be patented. And so the A in aspirin is the acetyl group, and the SPIRN, the spirin, is from the birch leaf spirea and the filipendula. So a little bit of trivia, the word aspirin is down to those two. And the other thing that's wonderful about this is it is a skin cell proliferant. So it is a very, very powerful wound healer, and it can go deep into the tissues of the body. And one of the things I wanted to talk about quickly is broken bones, and that you could utilize the outer bark of the trees and put it over top of a bone break. And if you put it beside fire, sometimes, depending on how old the tree is, it will actually shrink wrap to the limb, just like a cast, and it will hold it very steady. And this was done traditionally for a long time by our people. And the wonderful thing about it is that the salicins will actually penetrate through the skin and go deep. Not only to offer pain relief, but also to offer quick healing too. So it's a wonderful plant. That's all I'm going to say on that slide. We can go on to the next one, please. There's another wonderful correlation, and that is with bees and poplar. And I always tell people on our walks that bees do some very special things. First of all, bees are the only ones that can make honey. Bees are the only ones that are able to make wax. And bees are also the only ones that are able to make something called propolis. And propolis is an amazing medicine, and bees use it from the poplar tree. And they will line the outside of their hive, and it helps to prevent bacterial infection from getting into the hive, and a number of other wonderful things. And so many people got curious about propolis and have used it in tinctures, and it too is absolutely astounding for very severe infections. The way that plant medicine works is it actually has to touch the tissue. And so for the throat, you can make a tincture and then spray the propolis into the back of the throat, and it's incredibly effective for that. I use it in traditional dentistry. And no, I don't have people sat in a dentist chair, but for tooth care, it is really quite incredible. My son came over to my place one morning. It was about 4 a.m. He was in enormous pain. And of course, we didn't really have an opportunity to get into a dentist, but I had him put some propolis down into the tooth itself. He had a huge abscess underneath his jawline from infection. And by the time the 4 hours passed to get into the dentist, most of that infection had been removed, had been pulled out. So it was highly effective for him. And of course, if you can manage the infection, you can certainly manage the pain too. So within an hour, the pain was significantly reduced. And we can go on to the next one, please. These plants are spiritually powerful. To me, I find them as a miracle plant, not only because of the connection to my grandmother, to my kukum, but also because of just the feel that they give to me when I walk out into the forest. They have different scents to them at different times of the year, and probably one of my favorite times is during the fall. They have an interesting scent of apples just before apples are ready to fall off the tree, when they have that very, very sweet scent to them. And that's what the poplar trees smell like to me. But I remember my grandmother was telling me about the poplar themselves. And normally when we go to pick medicine, she would tell me to be, she would tell me to be very respectful and very careful and just simply pick what we needed. But with the poplar, once in a while, she would say, no, we will choose one tree and we will pick all of the buds off of it. And the reason why is because of the plant's caterpillar strategy. So the poplar, when they are under attack by the tent caterpillars, will actually drop all of their leaves. And when they do that, then they don't produce leaves sometimes up to 2 years. And the reason why they can do that is because they will drop the white powder off of their trunks, and they can photosynthesize through the bark. And it's interesting, you will see when throughout the summer, if you find a plant, a tree like that has no leaves on it, you'll see that in full sun, the white powder will drop off as well. So she said that sometimes it will mimic what the caterpillars do, and they will just simply drop all of their leaves off. And of course, the trees will talk to each other. They'll pass on the information that they're being attacked by tent caterpillars. And when they do that, you'll see trees in a small area will actually drop their leaves. It's kind of cool. And we can go on to the next one. And this plant, it's hard to see in that picture, but this plant was such an important one to me that I decided I needed to bead my story about it. So that's just a little bit of bead work that I started. It's a little beaded purse, and it's actually a birch and poplar forest. And I did this because last year I was up at the Bead, Hide and Fur Symposium in Whitehorse. And I was talking about my grandmother to one of the elders there and how much I missed her and my love of her and the poplar. And it was her that encouraged me to bead my story, and that I should have the poplar featured in the beadwork. So I thought I would put a little picture of my beadwork there. And we can go on to the next slide, please. The last thing I'm going to tell you about is some exciting research that I have just been invited to participate in, involving, we believe, the poplar tree, but a professor from the veterinary pharmacology department at U of C reached out to me to find out if I wanted to do some collaborative work on wild animals that would self-medicate. And she was interested in the animals that that had parasites, and would they use specific plants in order to rid themselves. And it came down to the wild feral horses here just north of Sundre, close to my quarter section actually. And we do know that the horses were eating the poplar in order to remove parasites for themselves. So in the next month or so, we're going to be out on the ground beginning our research to see if horses utilize poplar and other plants in order to remove parasites from their bodies. So my understanding is that this type of work has never been done anywhere. To look at animals that self-medicate here in Canada. So it's going to be a first for us, and we're very excited about that. And next slide, please. And with that, I will say thank you. I appreciate you all. And again, thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you so much, Brenda. That was amazing. You're just a fount of knowledge, and I know we just scratched the surface on everything that Poplar has to offer and everything that you have to offer. I have a question coming in. Can the propolis or the salve be used in steam for sinus issues?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to use it. Because of the resins that are in the poplar buds, it's a bit hard to get those out through water. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll put the tiniest little bit of isopropyl alcohol in them to soak them a little bit, and then I'll simmer them for a while to get rid of the alcohol. And then once the alcohol has been dissipated, then you would use that as a sinus inhale, and it works beautifully.
I've got another one here. Could the white powder from poplar be used in homemade lip balm to offer sun protection?
No, unfortunately, it really can't. The reason is the actual structure of the powder itself is almost like a bent fish scale, and that is it's almost reflective, and that's how it actually protects the tree and also protects you. But when you put it into oils, it loses that shape, and from my understanding, is not quite as useful after that for sunscreen. Great question, though.
Are there any more questions? I'll give people a chance to type. And while we're doing that, I'll hold up my own poplar salve that I was gifted for a presentation that I gave one time, and I jealously guard it because I know it takes a lot to make, and I don't know how to make it. So, but I do suffer, or had suffered, from cracked, dry hands, particularly in the wintertime, and it sure doesn't take a lot of that, and it's fixed right up, and it smells amazing. I wish I could open the jar and convey that smell to everybody on the webinar, because it's beautiful. Oh, it's so good.
It is. It's such a wonderful smell. Yeah, I pity people that have never smelled the poplar before. It's
especially
beautiful.
Putting it on in the winter, it just makes me think of summer, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And Chet, I was going to say to you that, yeah, if you ever want to learn to make it, come and do one of my workshops. They're a lot of fun.
I'm going to have to. There's a lot I need to learn. So
absolutely.
Sarah James asked, is there anywhere we can buy the salve?
I sometimes do the salve to order. I don't go into production. I'm more into reteaching traditional medicine. But yeah, I think that there's probably places, health food stores might have it actually.
Okay. And then there's one other question. Can you soak the buds in oil for too long? I made some a few years back, but haven't finished the process.
Well, it's interesting because oil, depending on the oil, can be anhydrous. Usually there's no spoilage, and also some of the properties in the buds would prevent it from spoiling as well. You could potentially see that there would be no mold or anything growing in there. However, I would say that the oil may go rancid. You know when oil is rancid when you smell it and it smells like old peanuts or old wax crayons, then you know your oil is absolutely rancid for sure.
There's another question. I guess it's a two-part question. Where can we learn more about your workshops, and do you offer workshops in Saskatchewan?
So we're just going to be adding our workshops for this year onto my website, which is www.mahican.ca. And we offer workshops pretty much everywhere. We will come as long as there is a core group of at least 10 people. We're happy to travel. I've gone into Europe, to the Netherlands, to England to do them. So if people have an interest, then we're happy to travel and do that.
Are there any more questions for Brenda? I'm not seeing any. All right. Well, they can always contact you through your website.
Yes, absolutely. Somebody said, can you spell the website? It's www. That's M as in Mike, AHIKAN as in November .ca. Perfect.
All right. Well,
Great.
with that, I think
Thank
we'll
you.
wrap that up. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge, and your stories were amazing. I'm sure people will be in contact with you. And if I find myself in your area, I am definitely going to go out on a walk with you or take one of your workshops. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Next up, we have Sandra. She's the last presenter in this session. I've known Sandra for a number of years, and we're still involved in things together. She has been involved in developing and delivering some of our educational material because she's an educator. She wrote a number of our lesson plans. We've dealt with each other on an archaeological basis, and through Brightwater and Wanuskewin. And Wild About Saskatoon most recently. I guess we're still involved together with that. So and she set up in her kitchen there. This is great.
Yep, I'm here.
I'll just do a brief introduction. So Sandra has worked as an educator in Saskatchewan for major local nature centers, school systems, Wanuskewin, and has taught numerous workshops. In her work, Sandra highlights essential ethics and risks of wildcrafting and how to identify poisonous plants to encourage students and fellow enthusiasts to foster a respect for nature and help them understand that there are ways to feed and support themselves beyond the supermarket. She is also a nature columnist and author of several publications and educational plans for the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Archaeological Society. Sandra is an author of the book, The Path of Wild Food, published by Lone Pine. So when I initially asked Sandra to do this presentation, she came up with a fantastic new format. So we're going to go beyond the PowerPoint and right into Sandra's kitchen. She joked with me that she's had to practice baking several times for this webinar, and her husband has been so very happy about that. And that maybe she'll launch her own show on the Food Network after this. So take it away, Sandra.
Hey, well, welcome to my kitchen. It's this is the most people I've actually ever had in here. It's kind of a one bum room, but I can reach everything, which is nice. I've been foraging for over 30 years now, and using nature as my supermarket, and found some unique flavors that I couldn't find anywhere else. And so I'll share a recipe with you from my book, The Path to Wild Food. So one of my favorites is cattail pollen biscuits. And here's what you need to know about cattail pollens. They are a filtering plant, so know your water source. For example, the town of Aberdeen actually uses it to clean their sewage system. So if you were to consume the plants there, there's likely E. coli present. Secondly, they don't preserve well. So when you pick them, you have to eat them within a day or so, and this is why you don't see them as a commercial crop. When I am processing my cattail pollen, what I do with it is I measure it out into 1 cup bags and I freeze it, and that usually gets me through to next spring. And I always use all-purpose flour. I did try once with rice flour, but they were really crumbly and they dried out within a day or so. So the gluten does have some purpose. So start with cold butter. You kind of want to squish it with a fork a little bit just to soften it up, but the cold butter works sort of best. So get this squished up just a bit. And now take your 1 cup of cattail pollen. And this is like gold to me in many respects, and that's the color that you're left with when you cook too. So 1 cup of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon and a half of baking powder, and then I like to use raw sugar because the nutrients aren't taken out of it, and I just use 1 tablespoon because it just kind of helps take a little bit of the bitterness out. Not that it's bitter, but it just gives it a nice little flavor. Make sure your flour is all mixed very well. So and what you want it to be is nice and yellow, and you're not seeing any white left in it. And this way you've made sure you've mixed in your sugar and your baking powder. There we go. And now I'm going to add it slowly to the butter. You're likely going to have to get in there with your hands, and kind of what you want to look for is the texture of sand. So we'll get this started a bit here. Squish it down. I've got my oven preheated at 425, and so it'll be ready, and hopefully by the time I'm done this, they'll be out of the oven even. I like to serve it with my rose hip bergamot jelly. It's one of my recipes in the book as well. I actually was teaching a workshop, and I had both of them out there, and I'd never tried the bergamot jelly with it before, but someone else put the 2 of them together, and I found that it was actually very tasty. And so at this point, I am going to get in there with my hands here. And this mixes it up a little faster. And so when I start adding my milk, one of the things, you kind of have to add the milk slowly, because when you're adding the milk, depending on the moisture in the pollen itself, you don't necessarily have to use the full amount of milk. And what I have here is, 1 1/3 cup of milk. No, 3/4 of a cup of milk, sorry. So I'm going to start, actually I can feel that this does have a lot of moisture in it, and that's probably because it has been in the freezer. You do get a little bit of crystallization in it. And so what I'm looking for here is kind of the texture of Play-Doh. And we're getting close. I'm getting gooky here, but that's just part of baking. There we go. Yeah, that'll probably be enough. So I've left actually probably almost 1/4 of a cup out of it. Oops, I'm kind of getting a mess in my kitchen here. There we go. So now once I have it into that Play-Doh kind of texture, I don't know if you can see that well enough, and it's kind of all sticking together, and I'm just kind of picking up the bottom of the stuff on the pan. So now I'm going to put it into about 1-inch balls. Does that look about a 1-inch ball? onto cookie sheets here, and I'm using a non-stick sheet on my pan here. So here's a warning. I was out gathering with a friend once, and we were moving from one pond to the next, and we came upon a moose in the pond. And the moose was grazing on the cattails there. So we stopped at the top of the hill, pulled out our phones and started taking pictures. The moose wasn't feeling very photogenic and kind of disappeared into the bush line. We soon realized that it was coming up at us through the bush line. We turned and started running as fast as possible. My friend's wearing rubber boots, and I'm thinking, yes, nobody can run fast in rubber boots. I can outrun her. Never mind the fact she was 20 years my junior. By the time we got up the second hill, we truck in sight there, the moose had given up its pursuit. And we figured it had a calf and returned to it now that it had gotten rid of us pesky tourists. So we can cross off running with the bulls because we've done the Canadian version, running from the moose. But, we got out of there with both the cattails that we had previously picked, our phones, lousy moose pictures, and sore butts for about a week, both of us. So, so just in case you're wondering what's in cattail pollen, or in cattails in general, because actually cattails are the smorgasbord of all wild food. It's manganese, magnesium, potassium, sodium, dietary fibers, iron, and vitamin A, B, C, and D, as well as K. So there's quite a lot of nutrients in them. The other thing, in the fall, you can dig up the root system and also turn that into flour and eat it like a, there, I'm kind of sticky, and eat them like a potato too. It's actually quite sweet. In the early spring, when the cattails first start to come up, you can pluck off the outer leaves and eat them raw like cucumber, or steam them like asparagus. There, we'll set the timer here for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then, depending on the weather, of course, that's when the cattail pollen is available, and it's the top part of the spike that you see what's left over on the top. It's not the brown part, that's the female part. It's the male part of the plant. And actually, when that's green and ripe, you can snap that off and steam it like corn on the cob, and it's really good with some garlic butter. What I do with those, I'll blanch them a little bit, and then I can freeze those as well. And you can also peel it off and use it almost as a bread substitute. So, but if anybody has any questions about foraging, cattails aren't my only favorite plant. One of the other things I do is I've been growing a lot of the wild stuff in my backyard now, and I've been collecting my own seeds, and I take those seeds back out to where I forage, just because I do believe if you're going to get into foraging, you need to protect and preserve wild areas and become an advocate for nature. So, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
There's a question from Dawn. Sorry if this is obvious, but how do you collect the pollen? Do you just shake it out over a bucket?
Okay, I've done it a couple of ways over the years. Plastic bags do work, but the problem with the plastic bags, like I said, this is like gold. It really sticks to the plastic, so use a paper bag if you're going to put it over top of the cattail and shake it out. But I've lately discovered it's actually easier to pick the top off and put it into a paper bag, take it home, and my next method of processing it is I'm going to use a seeder and have the pollen bounce off of that, because what I've been doing is flicking it with my finger over a screen, and you do have to sieve it out because there will be creatures in your pollen like spiders and stuff, but you don't have to bake those. I usually throw them back out into my pond because I do have cattails in my pond, but I never produce enough to actually use for cooking.
Another question came in from Heather. What is your next most favorite foraged item?
Actually, I'd have to say wild onions and a cheese sauce on an asparagus omelet. to die for. And I grow them in my own yard, and that's one of the seeds I take out to the wild quite a bit in my favorite places.
Any more questions? We've got a bit of time before the biscuits come out.
Yeah, we're at 7 minutes, so I have a batch of rosehip bergamot jelly here as well. Recipes in my book for that one as well. I am working on my next manuscript at this point, but I'm still busy playing with my food.
Oh, here's another question. Sarah wants to know, without giving away specifics, where are your favorite sites in the province to forage?
Good question, because yes, us foragers tend to covet our spots. Actually, Saskatoon, there's lots of spaces around that are wild and available. Of course, Cranberry Flats and places like that, please respect that it is a conservation area and don't pick there. But I happen to have friends out at Whitecap, and I go out there an awful lot, and we do all kinds of foraging out there. And when I'm camping, we're foraging frequently as well. But yeah, those are one of our covenant secrets, because yes, you kind of want to make sure that you're maintaining those areas so that it's not over foraged.
Okay, there's another question. We have a lot of cattail. Do we need to test the water before making use of the pollen?
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, if you know where your water source is coming from, for example, I've worked at Wanuskewin, and I would never use the cattails there either, because I do know what's upstream. There's a lot of farming, and a lot of people are dumping their garbage in that creek as well, and so therefore I wouldn't do that pick there. If you're also near a heavy metal mine, cattails pick up metals quite easily too, so it really does help. If there's a spring nearby, then you're very likely safe.
Another one here. If one removes the male part of the cattail, does it affect the reproduction and sustaining of the plant?
No, not at all. Not on cattails. They'll spread with their roots as well, and you'll never be able to pick all the cobs, especially if you're out in a place that's you're not going to over forage. I always wear hiking boots, and like I said, my friend was wearing rubber boots. I don't get right into the pond. I kind of just stay on. I'm skirting the edge, so there's still lots left in there. I don't like to get too wet. It's easier to run in rubber and then in hiking boots than rubber boots too.
Somebody missed the amount of butter you used.
Oh, sorry. Let me just double check here. It was 1 1/3 cup of butter. I got cheat notes over here.
Another question is, approximately how many cattail seed heads did you have to pick for a cup of pollen?
That's a fair question. A cup of pollen, you could probably get away with 20. One of the things I do is why I also pick the tops is because once you flick it out once, you can dry them out in the sun in your backyard on racks, and you can flick it again, and you get another at least 2 or 3 cups out of it. So don't wait, as soon as you finish the first time, don't throw it out. Just make sure it's in a non-windy area in your yard that's nice and sunny, and you can harvest it again. So.
Okay, you have a buffalo berry ice cream recipe in your book. Are there any tips or tricks for preparing this?
Well, make sure that you're not using any plastic, because if the berry comes into any contact of grease, it won't foam up properly. And use a whisk, or you can use a beater. A whisk works better. I have 20-year-old sons, and so that there's a nice strong arm to get it going for me.
What is the name of your book, and where can we buy it? What's your next book about? You can actually buy it most stores. It's The Path to Wild Food. You can buy it on our website as well. However, Sandra's book sold so well that they actually sold the publisher out. So Lone Pine is reprinting more as we speak.
Thank you.
I actually had to give away my own copy of The Path to Wild Food because a Native Plant Society member wanted it, and it was brand new. And so I'm currently without one as well. And I've contacted Lone Pine, and they're trying to even recall them, the unsold copies from bookstores, because they know that I have the demand that I'm going to be able to sell any copies they give me. But I believe you have some. Maybe we can make some kind of an arrangement.
Yeah, we can. I've only got a few copies left, and yeah, I'm about to call them and ask for some more books myself, actually. The other question is about my next book. It's called Revenge on Your Weeds, a dish best served hot or cold. And there'll be a few repeats of some plants, but I'm going to give you a new recipe, but they don't give you that next step where you can, what to do with it.
Sorry, can you just repeat the title? There was a little bit of a video glitch there.
Okay. My next book will be Revenge on Your Weeds, a dish best served hot or cold. And there will be a few repeat plants, but different recipes with them.
Are there any more questions for Sandra?
We've got 1 minute left for the biscuits to come out.
I thought maybe one of the questions might be, what's her address? Because she'll have fresh baked biscuits in a minute.
Yeah, especially if anyone lives close in the neighborhood, hey?
I'm close enough. You might get a knock on your door. I know where you live, Sandra.
They are a very unique flavor, because I can tell you that the young plant tastes like cucumber, but I can't describe the flavor of cattail pollen. It's got its own. Get my cooling racks out here.
Okay, there's another question here. Is there any good groups for foragers to get together? I'm assuming they mean online right now.
I'm not really aware of anything that would be online available. Oh, there's our timer. I am doing a couple of walks in the spring here, and but I am limiting the amount of people that are attending due to COVID, because I do feel with it being outside, and if we're all wearing masks, we're okay. I'm doing one with the there's that Jane, I can't remember, the Jane something walk is coming
Jane's
up.
Walk.
And I've done lots, yes, and I've done lots with the Archaeology Society. Could you get me a flipper? I took all my utensils and had, yeah, sorry, my sous chef is in the background here. Man, I kind of got rid of some clutter in my kitchen. It's not usually this nicely tidy. But yeah, they look done. You can see they puffed up quite a bit. So you can they're done. And when I do store them, I tend not to close the lid on the container that I'm storing them in, because again, I think it's the moisture, because they're growing in ponds, right? That just seems to retain itself quite a bit in the cattails. So I had some friends come visit from BC, and I made them some cattail pollen biscuits. And she was out camping, and she sent me a text, and ironically, the both of us were cattail pollen picking at the same time, which was kind of neat when you're that far away from one another. So some rose hip bergamot jelly actually helps let them sit for a bit, but they are delicious warm. Here, we'll hand the first one over to my sous chef. There you go. Again, one of my favorites.
Any last questions for Sandra?
I got a mouthful.
Yeah, now's a really good time to ask her a question. Nope. Okay, well, that's perfect. Perfect timing too. We landed
Yeah, you're
basically
on.
right on the 3 o'clock mark. Yeah, yeah, this is fantastic.
Well, thanks
Yeah.
everyone, and enjoy foraging. It's a fun adventure. Hopefully, you don't run into any moose or skunk.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sandra. I really appreciate it. This has been amazing.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Okay. Next, you're stuck with me. I'm sorry. You started the day with me, and you have to end the day with me. I'm just going to get my slideshow set up. Take a minute to get up, walk around, have a bit of a stretch. Okay. So I'm going to end the day talking about some of the things that you can do in your own yard, even if you have a tiny yard. In some cases, even if you live in a condo or an apartment and don't actually have more than a pot full of soil, some of the things you can plant that are edible. So all of the species I'll be talking about are, I'm sure they have other kind of processed uses where you can make a tincture, you can make a tea. These are all ones that I'm going to be talking about that you can eat directly. And this picture on the title slide here is of my kind of side yard. It's that shady area in between 2 houses that doesn't, really get, most people just throw down a bunch of crushed rock or something like that because they can't be bothered with it. I planted it to native plants. I call it my little forest garden or my shade garden. It's probably my favorite spot in my yard. And it's one that I can just leave, and the plants kind of sort themselves out. And basically everything you see in that, except for this leaf right here, is a rhubarb leaf. I do have one rhubarb plant there, but aside from that, everything you see is native, and almost everything you see is edible in this photo. So for those of you who aren't Native Plant Society members and who have joined us in the afternoon and didn't really get the feel for who we were because you missed the morning session, we're a nature-based registered charity. That's why you're all getting tax receipts for your donations to attend this. We have hundreds of members across the province, a little over 200, but we have members in Manitoba, Alberta, BC, and a couple in Montana as well. So we're a diverse little group. Normally we would offer workshops and tours in person. We hope to get to that soon. I would love to see all of you again outdoors very, very soon. And we have projects almost from corner to corner to corner. So why use native plants? You can read those bullet points yourself. Basically, they're just very low maintenance, very hardy plants. And you can see this gooseberry growing out of a rock is a perfect example. I think this was taken in the Northeast Swale, which is a natural area very close to my house in Saskatchewan. And you can see it's not only surviving, but it's thriving. There's a berry here, and then there's another berry forming at the top of the plant, just growing out of the crevice of a rock. And it's loving life. These are species, when I was putting this presentation together, that I thought, people know about these ones. I'm not really going to dwell on them. I'll just mention them in passing here. We all are aware of these and probably able to grow them. They're very commercially available. They are, however, because they're commercially available, it's because they're horticultural varieties of the native species, unless you're actually buying the true native wild type species from a native plant seller. I'll mention haskap. There's been proliferation of haskaps recently because of the work that Bob Boers has done with his fruit breeding program through the University of Saskatchewan. So building on what Sandra said about wild onions being one of her favorites, here's a prairie onion. They are really easy to grow. In my yard, they proliferate. I don't have to try hard at all to have maybe 50 of them or 100 of them in my bed. I just have a little raised bed. All parts of this plant are edible, raw or cooked. The interesting thing is that, you know what the onion smells like, what a typical grocery store onion smells like. This has that oniony smell throughout the plant. And even the seeds, if you collect the seeds and you're planting the seeds, I used to clean seeds as part of one of my jobs. And you would just, after a day of cleaning onion seeds, you would just stink of it. So even the seeds have that onion smell. They're one of our earliest bloomers, and so that's great for pollinators that overwinter, and they come out basically just like a hungry grizzly bear that's overwintered. They need that nectar snack to keep them going, to tide them over until the next plant blooms. They're very short as well, like maybe 6 inches high. So they're great for borders or at the front of flower beds, wherever they can get a little sun. You can plant them as seeds or plants. Both work equally well. The seeds germinate readily. They grow not very big the first year, but by the second year, you should have a flowering plant. And then beyond that, it just increases the size of its bulb. You're not going to get an appreciable bulb to eat for a few years if you start from seed. You can eat all of the other native onions that we have. We have Allium stellatum, Allium cernum. Allium cernum, I believe, is rare in the province. I think there are a couple of seed sources if you'd want to grow it in your yard. One bit of caution here: the plant on your left is very, very toxic and looks superficially similar to an onion. I heard of a story recently in Montana where there was a fellow who was collecting wild onions, accidentally collected a death camas bulb, but because he had the smell of onions on his hands from collecting the wild onions, the death camas bulb also took on the smell of that wild onion, and it put him in the hospital. He was very, very sick. So please make sure you know what you've got. So this is kind of the exact opposite. I went from sunny location and very, very short plant to shady location and very, very tall plant. This is Agastache funiculum, giant hyssop or anise hyssop. That was in the title slide photo. It's all through my forest understory garden, and it's great. I've got a 5-year-old son, and whoever comes to the house, like if it's his grandparents before COVID or something like that, and we'd be out in the backyard, he'd just bring them leaves from this plant, and he'd go, "Here, eat this," because he knows all the edible plants in our yard already, and he's foraging out there constantly in the summertime. And so this is a great plant. All of the plant parts are edible, raw or cooked. You can do fantastic things with this thing. You can make you can throw it in for flavoring meat dishes if you like that anise flavor. You can steep it for a tea, either hot or cold. My wife one time must have had a ton of time on her hands because she picked all the flowers and steeped them and made this kind of purplish colored anise flavored jelly that was amazing. And then she promptly swore to never do that again because it was a lot of work, but it was delicious. The bees go crazy for this plant. My Agastache plants in the summertime literally vibrate and hum with bees. They're super attracted to this plant. It's extremely easy to grow. You can plant it as plants or seeds. Even as a seed, it'll get maybe a foot tall in the first year if you start them indoors or very early in the spring. And it seems to self-seed but not overseed. It won't take over. It's fantastic. Yeah, smells and tastes like black licorice, every part of the plant. This is one that you might be familiar with, just because in gardening circles, it does have a presence, but you might not have known that it's native. It's native to Saskatchewan. It's actually rare. It's a rare plant in Saskatchewan because it's more of an eastern species that just kind of ekes its way into the eastern side of the province. Jerusalem artichoke, it's not from Jerusalem. It's native to here, and it's not an artichoke either. So it's a terrible name for the plant, but it's a great plant. It needs a very sunny location. It can take dry areas. It needs a little bit of moisture, but I do mean a very little bit of moisture. It doesn't need moist soil by any means. And it's very tall. These are growing in my garden, not currently, obviously, but last year. And they tower over me. So I'm actually taking the picture looking up at them. I have a 6-foot fence in the back, and that's where my garden is against. And then my neighbor's house is on the other side. And my neighbor loves the fact that I plant these plants where I do, because she can look out her window and they're basically at her eye level, because they grow about 2 to 3 feet over my 6-foot fence. So they're clearly visible to her. They have tubers, these little knobby, gnarly tubers, kind of like some of those potatoes that have, they're a little longer potatoes, like your finger potatoes or something like that. You have to cook them. You can boil them like a potato, and you can slice and pickle them. That's the way we do ours. I've got I don't know if people can see this jar here. These are sliced and pickled Jerusalem artichokes, and we're going through them like crazy at our house because my son likes peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. That's his favorite. So you can, the best way to start these plants is to get a hold of some tubers, which is usually never a problem because they're very prolific tuber producers. You can plant them in the spring. I actually plant mine in the fall. So after I harvest mine, and I've got the big holes from digging all the tubers out anyway, I just take one of the smaller ones, you know, maybe something as big around as a toonie or something like that, and plunk that back in the hole about 6 inches deep, cover it up with dirt, stamp it down with my foot, and then pin flag the row so that I don't rototill them up in the spring. And yeah, by summer, you've got these 8-foot tall monster plants with these beautiful yellow flowers that the pollinators love. Birds will eat the seed if you let them ripen to seed. I actually just chop that all down and leave it in my garden because insects and such overwinter in the stems and amongst the branches and foliage if you pile it on the ground. And yeah, it's a great plant. Next is ostrich fern. That most people are familiar with. It does need a shady, moist kind of forest understory area. I have it growing in my forest understory. It does spread via rhizomes. I find the easiest way to control it is just to pick them and cook them in the springtime when you see these new fiddleheads poking up where you hadn't seen them before in the year before, or if you haven't planted them there. They get about knee high, but the fiddleheads will only get about 6 to 8 inches high before they start to unfurl. And once they're unfurled, you're too late. The growing, you have to pretty much grow from a transplant, and it does like slightly richer soils. Fun fact, ferns have changed very little. You can look back in the fossil record. They're some of our earliest plants, and they look pretty much the same as they did 400, 500 million years ago. Fireweed. This is a great plant. It needs the right spot in people's gardens. It can be aggressive. I have it planted with other fairly aggressive species, so it's more or less kept in check. It is quite tall. It's waist high I've even had some get almost shoulder high. and it is great for pollinators as well. You have to catch the plants when they're young if you want to eat them. So maybe a foot tall or something like that, and you can steam them just like you'd have steamed greens. You can actually ferment them to make tea. And the same year that my wife made the hyssop jelly, she actually did the same thing with fireweed and made a fireweed jelly. And it's kind of a clear pink jelly. It does take on the same color as the flowers you see in the photo there, and it was just kind of a sweet tasting jelly. It was very nice. Again, my wife swore to never do it again. It's a lot of work to collect all the flowers and steep them and make jelly. Even making jelly, period, is a lot of work. So all that harvesting does take some time. Luckily, we had a very concentrated patch. The thing is, with this, if you're just collecting it for greens, if you let it go too far, you'll know right away because it's tough to pick. It gets woody very fast. The leaves aren't tender anymore. They get very kind of stringy, and they don't taste very good. So you'll know right away if you're too late. Yeah, fun fact, it's the territorial flower of the Yukon. Violets. We have a number of different violet species. The one in the photo there is Viola adunca, early blue violet. We have Viola canadensis, which spreads via rhizomes, unlike our other violets. I have both of those species and then some for native violets in my shade garden, although the early blue violet will come out into the sun as well. So it's actually kind of moved into my sunny prairie grassland area. All parts of the violet plant are edible. The flowers are, the greens are. You can eat them fresh, you can steam them. You can, and again, this would be a lot of work, but you could candy the flowers, or you could steep them to make tea, or use that in jelly. And the violet leaves contain more vitamin A than an equal amount of spinach, and it just has a ton of vitamin C, about as much as 4 oranges. So it's a very, very nutritious plant, even though it's a very diminutive plant. There's Western Canada violet. So that's the one that spreads via rhizomes, also seed, but more so rhizomes. If you're a Native Plant Society member, we have profiled this as our cover plant. That was actually the photo of the cover plant, and then you got the little write up in the back about violets. And in there, I was talking about, some violets do contain up to 4,000 parts per million of salicylic acid. And then one of the other fun facts is if you take the leaf and pick it off, that leaf stem or petiole has, if you can kind of pull it apart, there's this white stringy core, and if you chew it, it kind of tastes like chiclets. If anybody remembers what chiclets gum tastes like, kind of like that, which is it's a bizarre flavor because it's kind of minty, but it's not a mint plant. So you can grow violets quite easily from seed or seedlings, and they're very adaptable plants. Strawberry blight, super weird looking plant. I mean, it just looks weird, but very edible, quite easy to grow. It's an annual plant, so you'll get what you see in the picture by the end of one summer. This is one that I have seen available in nurseries as seed, like when you're buying your garden seed from those little stands and you buy your beans and your peas. Sometimes I'll see a seed packet for strawberry blight. It needs sun. This is one that if you are short on real estate and you just have a pot of soil, this will grow very well in a pot of soil. The greens taste like spinach, basically. but the fruits have a slightly sweet flavor, and they're kind of, they've got a unique texture. So yeah, and then the leaves are very nutritious as well, high in vitamins A and C. Here's another one, breadroot. Other people know it as prairie turnip. It grows in drier prairies, full sun. It can't get too much sun. It's a perennial. It's very short. That's the entirety of the plant that you see. That's Rob Wright's hand. We were out on his property for a Native Plant Society field tour near Cherry Lake, south of Indian Head. And he dug one up to show us the tuber. Very starchy tuber. There are so many uses for this plant. Indigenous folks, and I'm not going to speak for them, but they use it in just about every way. They ate it raw. There's soup thickener, cooked, from fresh or dried and pounded into flour. It's just a miracle plant as far as what you can do with the tuber. So there's a Lakota woman in the picture there, and similar to the garlic braids that you would see, you know, that, you know, I've got German ancestry and my wife's Ukrainian ancestry, and our ancestors used to braid garlic, and that's a similar thing. They'd pick them, dry them, and braid them, and it would store for a very, very long time. And when I was doing some research on breadroot for a different paper, I actually learned from a Lakota person that their people had such an affinity for this plant that they would choose their hunting spots. If there were 2 hunting spots and one also had breadroot and one didn't have breadroot, they would definitely pick the one that had breadroot, because there was just, they were so useful to them. So you can plant seeds or seedlings to grow this in your yard. It does really well on just about any soil, although it is slow growing. It'll be years before you get that tuber to any appreciable size where you could harvest it. Harvesting does kill the plant. And then some fun facts, you cannot eat the pods, even though it is a legume, and you can eat, you know, beans and peas. You can't, none of the top growth is really edible. If you're out hiking in the fall, sometimes you'll see this plant, if it's a windy day, you'll see it tumbling along because it actually has quite large, heavy seeds that can't be spread by the wind. The pod will just open and that heavy seed will drop next to the parent plant otherwise. So it has to find it, or it has to have to evolve a different way to spread its seeds, and so the way it does that, to overcome the fact that it's got a really heavy seed that can't be carried on the wind, it just breaks off and the whole plant kind of tumbles like a tumbleweed, and then as it tumbles it will release seed. So that's a really novel, ingenious way of getting past the fact that your seeds are too heavy to be spread. And then I just threw some weird ones in, a couple of curveballs. So the pincushion cactus, which is on your left there, you've got a, after those flowers are pollinated by that bee, you'll have these little fruits that set up right in amongst the spines. Guaranteed you're going to poke yourself getting them out. But the easiest way to do it is to wait after a frost. They loosen up after a frost, and they're a little bit sweeter after a frost too. And if you're lucky, that old dried flower will hang on to give you a little bit of a stem above the spines to pull that fruit out. And it's sweet. It's kind of, I'm not gonna give this the credit it deserves, but it's kind of a sweet goo with seeds. I know I'm not making this very appetizing, but it is very appetizing, and it kind of tastes and has a mouthfeel like a ripe kiwi, because it does have little seeds in, kind of like the kiwi does. The prickly pear cactus, You can actually eat the pads. Obviously, you have to scrape all of the spines off, but you can eat the pads as well as a, I would think, a survival food, but maybe people have a taste for that. You can certainly, it would certainly taste better grilled than raw. And then ground plum, which is a legume, and you can eat the pods on this one. You see these little inflated kind of pinkish to reddish pods. They will turn that color when they're ripe. They're green before that. And you can just pick them off and eat them like that. If you're too late, they'll dry up, and then they'll kind of rattle. The seeds will rattle around in the pods. So those are just some weird ones that you wouldn't think are edible, but actually are. A couple of edibles for wet areas. Wild mint, I'm not going to go into that too much. Other presenters have. And then arrowhead, which this is my container water garden, and here's the arrowhead right there. It's just starting to get going. So you can grow it in a container water garden. You can grow it in a larger pond. And it gets these round little tubers. The other name for that is duck potato, because they do like to nosh on those little tubers. And then I've got a list of some edible native vines, shrubs, and trees. So bog cranberry, that should be obvious. It's a ground-hugging cranberry. Sand cherry, that's horticulturally available. I've got a little bit of sand cherry juice in these. My wife does a lot of canning, so that's good for me. And she makes them in these little single serving jars. So when you want a little refreshing cherry juice midwinter, there you go. So it's this beautiful dark color, and it's very rich in nutrients, and it's super tasty. Pin cherry, American wild plum, which is actually rare here, but you can grow it. The plums eaten raw are not good to taste. You have to kind of process that fruit. Riverbank grape. I'm going to give that a shout out, even though it's not native to here. It's native to Manitoba, but it will grow in your yard here and will produce grapes. Little ones, but grapes nonetheless. Bur oak, you can actually eat the acorns or process that into a flour. Beaked hazelnut, that's kind of a no-brainer. And thorny buffalo berry. So useful resources, we talked about Sandra's The Path to Wild Food. We sell that on our website. We'll be getting more copies soon, hopefully. It's also available at all your major bookstores. Edible and Medicinal Plants of Canada is another great one. Carrie's book, Mother Earth Plants for Health and Beauty. Plants Growing Along the River, which I had mentioned this morning, is put out by the Gabriel Dumont Institute. That has some traditional knowledge in there about how the plants were used. We carry that on our website, and Gabriel Dumont Institute also carries that. And then Plants of the Western Forest, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba Boreal and Aspen Parkland. They really need to come up with a shorter, catchier title for that. It used to just be called, I've got it on my bookshelf beside me, Plants of the Western Boreal Forest and Aspen Parkland. That was, I think, rolled off the tongue a little better. But anyway, that's where we are. We carry that book. It's also in major bookstores. And why I have that as a useful resource here, they have little tidbits in the description of some of these plant species about some of the uses, how they were either traditionally used or contemporarily used. Not necessarily for edibles, but sometimes. And then Mushrooms of Western Canada, which we also carry, that was recently re-released by Lone Pine. It had been out of print for a while, but we now have that as well. So those are good resources. If you're looking, if you see these plants and you think, gee, I really want to try that this spring in my yard, on our website, if you go under info resources here at the top, the first thing that will come up on the list is Native Plant Material and Services Supplier List. This is currently being updated. I hope to have the updated version on here relatively soon, but this one as it stands isn't outdated. You can find all of the suppliers, or you can email me. Just say, hey, Chet, I'm looking for this plant. Where do I find it? There are a number of, all of the ones that I listed are fairly easily found. I didn't want to highlight anything in my talk that you're going to have a devil of a time finding. So if you're in Saskatchewan, Blazing Star Wildflower Seed Company is great. Rennie and Lisa Grills, many of you know, are super knowledgeable folks. They're just outside of Saskatoon. They've got a website. If you're in Manitoba, Kelly at Prairie Originals is fantastic. I've ordered from her in addition to from Rennie and Lisa. If you're in Alberta, ALCLA, they are under new ownership, and I think Latifa is on right now. And they're doing a great job in Alberta as well. I've ordered in the past from ALCLA as well. And all of those different suppliers will have a slightly different list of species they carry. So try and find your most local source, and then go out from there. And don't be afraid to go a little further afield. As long as you stay kind of within the prairies, you should be fine. They all raise very hardy stock. And if you have any questions, there's me. If you ever go to our website and then use any of that contact information on the website, you're getting hold of me. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I know that there are some questions. All right, so I'm going to try and go up. Oh, Jerusalem artichoke makes great fries too. I've never tried it as fries, but that's true. I bet it would. The tubers are very hard, like a potato. So you could cut them into fries. Yeah, that would do well. Oh, that's a great tip, Dorothy. If you nip the fireweed when it's only about 6 to 10 inches tall, the plant will bush wonderfully and you'll have more to eat, or conversely, more blooms. What did I use to build my water garden? Yeah, great question. So I live on the east side of Saskatoon, which is dominated by heavy clay soils. So it was not difficult to build a water garden because everything below my topsoil naturally retains water. So literally all I did was, when I got my house about 15 years ago already, it just came with a bare lot, like not even the A horizon of soil, the most productive organic layer of soil. It came with the B horizon. So I had to truck topsoil in to grow anything because the developers had scraped every last little bit of living soil off of my property. So I put in about 10 inches of topsoil, but where I wanted my my in-ground water garden, I dug it deeper. I dug it about 18 inches deep, and then still filled it in with the same topsoil. I planted it to a number of different species, and then to supplement that, I've got a rain barrel, and when it overflows, it runs into that garden. Now, that is enough to keep things like marsh marigolds happy and my wild irises happy. Basically, anything that would grow on a pond edge is doing well where I've got it planted because of that, the depth that I dug it to, the fact that I've got a natural clay liner. If you don't live in clay soils, you would have to put in maybe some kind of plastic liner to hold the soil a little more. You don't want necessarily standing water in there, but you do want the water to stick around for a good amount of time before it percolates deeper into the soil profile. So some kind of semi-permeable permeable membrane. As for my water garden that I had in my pot, I just bought the biggest pot I could find at a garden center. which because it's wide, it's also too deep. So I had to put other things in it, like bricks and things like that, to bring the level up where I could put a pot in that into that water container water garden, so that the plants could be emergent and not submerged. Best time to start native seeds indoors under a grow light, like the long-fruited anemone, gaillardia, and hyssop. Now, actually, now's a great time. And even if you don't have grow lights, if you wanted to just put it in a sunny window, that's fine. Are there any other questions? I'll give it a second here. Nope. Yeah, if you start them too early, they might get a little leggy, particularly if they're not getting as much sun as they need. The other thing is, if you could set up a bit of a gentle breeze. So if you have a small tabletop fan, that really helps for a number of reasons. If the moisture stays around too long, you could get mildew and those kinds of fungal issues with the seedlings that might damage or kill the seedlings. The other thing is you're preparing them for life outside. It's going to be windy, and with that little bit of wind, it'll cause them to build or stouter tissues. You'll have more resilient seedlings when you plant them out. Okay, seeing no other questions, I guess we can bring this to a close. One more. Oh, strawberry blight tastes like young asparagus to me. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. They're super easy to grow. So I'm sad it's already over. And more or less problem-free for a first run at a virtual event. So thank you everybody for your time. I'm glad everybody could make it. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to contact me. If you have questions for the other speakers, I can route those questions through to them if you didn't get their contact information or anything like that. I'm always here working a regular workday in the office, Monday to Friday, so please reach out. Hopefully sometime soon we can see you in person, even if it's socially distanced with reduced numbers. We can see you at an outdoor event. I really hope that we can have something outdoors this summer. We're going to follow the COVID situation very carefully, and if we can, we will. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks.